Too many years. Good evening, legislators. Some of us explained to me that there was something that was going on Monday night that they may want to get involved in and partake in. That starts probably in about 45 minutes. So, something about, are you ready for some football? All right, if we all could please rise. And Legislator Mazzano, as our only veteran, is going to lead us in the pledge to the flag in just a moment. Legislator Mazzano, if you could lead us in the pledge to the flag. Almighty God, give us the strength, courage, and wisdom to always act in the best interest of the people of Westchester County in this chamber. Let us keep in mind that every decision that we make impacts upon the life, health, and safety of all our great county residents. Amen. Madam Clerk.
Majority Leader Harcum.
Here.
Minority Leader Mazzano. Ms. Borgia. Here. Mr. Burrows. Here. Mr. Gelfarb. Here. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Present.
Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Perez.
Here.
Mr. Ryan.
Here.
Ms. Shimsky.
Present.
Mr. Smith. Ms. Spreckman. Mr. Testa.
Here.
Ms. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Chairman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
And Mr. Mazzano is indeed here. Thank you. Mr. Harcum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, we'd move the consent agenda with the following few minor revisions. On page 5, we'd like to sever item number 6. And on page 8, items 19, 20, and 21, Committee on Government Operations should replace Committee on Community Services. So all three should read Government Operations. And with that, we move the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Harcum. Mr. Mazzano. Mr. Williams. Thank you. We are on consent agenda. Your pleasure, Mr. Harcum, with item 8.
That would be...
Item 6, I'm sorry. On
Item
page.
6, that would be over, sir.
Thank you. That item's over. For the minutes, Mr. Harcum, while you're standing.
Absolutely. At this time, in the spirit of getting moving toward the game, we would move the minutes of the August 6th meeting, which we held at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Mr. Harcum. Members, without objection, so ordered. Madam Clerk, Mr. Harcum, let's go and do the public hearings since we are at the prescribed time for that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, at this time, I would move that we would suspend our regular order of business for the purpose of conducting, I believe it is 2 public hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Harcum. Madam Clerk.
Notice of tonight's public hearings was published in the Journal News. I have proof of publication, which is available for inspection in my office. The first public hearing is from the Committee on Environment on applications for inclusion in the Westchester County Agricultural District Number 1, calendar year 2012. All speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Mr. Chairman, I have no cards.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Harcum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I would move to close that public hearing.
On the motion, Mr. Harcum, this public hearing is closed. Madam Clerk, item number 2.
Second public hearing is from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Government Operations on the proposed modification to the Ossining Sanitary Sewer District by the removal of one parcel of property located in the town of Ossining, 2 Cliff Drive. Mr. Chairman, I have no cards.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Harcum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I would move to close this public hearing as well and return to the regular order of business.
Thank you, Mr. Harcum. Madam Clerk, regular order of business.
Under public comment, I'll call the names of the speakers and ask that you please come down the aisle to my left and wait behind the black ropes. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Mark Tulis, Regina Riley, Joan Feinstein, William Stark, Edmund Riley. And the first speaker is Mark Tulis.
It's a long time since I've been up here. My name is Mark Tulis, and I want to thank the chair for the shout-out. Like I said, it's been a long time. I truly miss the late-night meetings that you guys have to go through here. And I often think while watching baseball games, I wish I was here. Depends on the team. Well, being a Mets fan, it's been not the best of years. Actually, it's not been the best of lives. I'm here to briefly support the county intervening in the signature flight tax exemption case, which is number 24 on the standing committee's calendar, which together with a related tax exemption case could cost county taxpayers $5 million if no action is taken by the county. That's $1 million to the county, $3 million to the schools, and $1 million to the towns and villages. Because even though it's one case, the one we're talking about, signature, involves $3.4 million, the related case is $1.6 million. Also to speak later is the superintendent of schools of the Blind Brook School District. 2 members of his board are here. Also the mayor of the village is here, as well as the administrator of the, are you administrator? What? Administrator of the, I have to get these titles right, administrator of the village. And we're all here because this is very important, and I can't emphasize how important. Number one, you're going to be retaining my firm to represent the county, but I'm being paid by the town. There's no financial cost to the county. And you might say, well, why is the county involved in all? Well, let me just briefly explain. There's a lease agreement between the county and Signature Aviation, in which Signature agreed that it would not seek an exemption of taxes. Signature has now changed its position and seeks refunds for the last 3 years, plus a full tax exemption going forward. So in addition to the $5 million, that's an additional $1 million per year going forward. That's every single taxpayer in this county will be negatively impacted, everyone. Since the lease agreement is between the county for the county property and and Signature, it is only the county that can invoke the bar on exemptions. So if the county takes no action, we cannot prevent this huge decrease in tax revenue and huge refund. Just think of all the jobs we're going to have to take care of, from the town, the school, the village, because of this lost $5 million. Just think of how many jobs that is in this county. Each hangar owner, you may think it's, there's an argument that, well, you're treating these different entities differently. Each hangar owner negotiated his own deal with the county. Some are tax exempt, some waive tax exemption. It wouldn't be fair to those who pay a higher rent and a lower and don't pay taxes to compete with the opposite. It's a subsidy and it's a competitive advantage to certain of the operators that they did not negotiate. This is a backdoor way of getting an improvement in their economic position. Now, importantly, what? Am I done yet? No. Very quickly.
Mrs. Tulis, if you could wrap it up.
Okay. Well, this involves county-owned property. It does not set a precedent for non-county-owned land for the county to intervene. This involves a county lease. This request is unique but vital to preserve our tax base for the county, schools, village, and town. Quick enough? Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Regina Riley.
Good evening. My name is Regina Riley. I'm from the County Legislative District number 9, Croton-on-Hudson. I wish first to thank Gordon Burrows, Sheila Marcotte, and Michael Smith for sponsoring and attending our Women's Equality Day Reform celebration on Friday, August 10th of this year. Our guest speaker, Susan Moga, and our 2012 Woman of the Year, Dr. Candice DeRusi, demonstrated by their words and especially by their lives how serving and loving others as children of God takes courage. Saying and doing the loving thing often is not saying and doing the warm, fuzzy thing. Dr. DeRusi, as member of the Board of Trustees of the State University of New York, often called upon her academic research scholarship, moral law as codified in the Ten Commandments, and sense of service to the students of the New York State University system to defend the First Amendment, human rights, and school choice. Accountability of students and professors is something she considers a life lesson which will help us grow in self-reliance, self-discipline, and respect of our dignity before God. This God is worshiped by our Christian, Jewish, and Muslim brothers and sisters. Reflecting on the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement, which are coming up, as a Christian, I owe a debt of gratitude to the Hebrews. Abraham is my father in faith. It saddened me that the Democrat convention delegates 3 times denied the human being's, quote, God-given potential, unquote, phrase. They yelled to have the phrase struck from the DNC platform. The same delegates asked that Jerusalem not be considered the capital of Israel. The direction of the Democrat Party seems to be away from its moral legal roots in the Decalogue and vocalizing God in prayer, the God of life, liberty, and our source of happiness and our human dignity. Dividing the U.S. People into rich versus poor, women versus men, black versus white, born versus unborn, seculars versus Christians, belies the nature of our nation. If one can divide an embryonic child from her mother, no union is sacrosanct. Let's pray our country remains the United States of America. Thank you.
Joan Feinstein.
I'm a little short. Thank you, Chairman Jenkins, and esteemed members of the Board of Legislators for allowing me to address you this evening. I am Joan Feinstein, and I'm the mayor of Rybrook and have served in that capacity for 4.5 years. You usually don't see me here, but this is a matter of such importance, as Mark Toole has stated previously, that I felt that my presence here was necessary and essential. I respectfully urge the Board of Legislators to support not only the Rybrook taxpayers, but the county taxpayers as well, by voting to intervene in a lawsuit to enforce the lease agreement between the county as lessor and Signature Flight Service Corporation as lessee with respect to property at the Westchester Airport. It's very simple. Signature is a private operator of support services for private planes at the airport, and it agreed to pay real property taxes to the County of Westchester, the Town of Rye, the Blindbrook School District, and also the Village of Rybrook. The county's lease agreement is very clear. It was approved by this Board of Legislators and clearly states that Signature hereby waives any right otherwise available to it to seek a judicial determination with respect to the non-exempt taxable status of the lease. Obviously, the rent that was negotiated was due to the fact that Signature was going to be paying real property taxes to the entities involved. Despite this clear language, Signature submitted a challenge of their non-tax exempt status to the Town of Rye and is seeking a judicial determination that it is tax exempt, in direct violation of the lease agreement between the county and Signature. Should they prevail, and that would be the problem, refunds would be due going back to 2008, and the amount is in the millions of dollars, and would have to be borne by the county, the town, the Blindbrook School District, and the Village of Rybrook. Not only that, if they were successful, the loss of revenue would be approximately $750,000 a year divided among those 4 entities. Any adverse determination could set a terrible precedent with other private operators at the county airport and could be devastating not only to the Village of Rybrook, the county, and the Blindbrook School District as well, and you will hear from representatives of the Blindbrook School District this evening. All private operators at the airport amount to $38 million in taxable value for the Village of Rybrook. Collectively, they represent the 6th largest taxpayer in the Village of Rybrook. And on an annual basis, not only Signature, but other operators, and once again, we're concerned about the precedential nature of this particular case. To the village alone, we're talking about revenue of between $275,000 and $300,000 a year. To a Village of Rybrook, which has an operating budget of only $16 million, this is an enormous amount of money. And as we all know, we're up against a tax cap as well. And once again, this doesn't only affect Rybrook, it affects the county as well. The issues about protecting taxpayer funds and not allowing private operators at the airport to stop paying taxes in violation of the written agreement that the county and Signature bargained for. These taxes that they pay support services that they receive at the airport. And without these funds, cutbacks to these or other essential programs may result or may have to be funded by other taxpayers. So I thank you once again for listening to me this evening, and I urge you to support the intervention by the county in this lawsuit. Thank you very much.
William Stark.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is William Stark. I'm the superintendent of the Blindbrook-Rye Union Free School District, and right now I'm supposed to be running a Board of Education meeting, but I'm here along with the Vice President of the Board of Education and another board member, which leaves us just with 3 members there to conduct business because of the seriousness of the Signature flight situation. You've heard from Mayor Feinstein and you've heard from Mark Toulis about the cost that can be incurred here by the various municipalities. School taxes, as you know, make up a large portion, a disproportionate amount of the average homeowner's taxes. I will tell you that we are estimating that of that $5 million that Mr. Toulis made note of, that $2.3 million of that relates to the Blindbrook-Rye School District. This is unconscionable given the fact that we are part of that tax cap and the significance of a $2.3 million cost at this particular time on a $34 million tax levy budget is the equivalent of a 6.75% tax increase. And it is an ongoing increase with regard to subsequent assessments. I urge the Board of Legislators to take the initiative of being in the forefront on this particular issue. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Mayor Feinstein, the town supervisor, David Gelfarb, for bringing this to the attention of the public, and I appreciate the involvement that the county board has in this regard and hope that you will make the proper decision. Thank you.
Ed Riley.
My name is Ed Riley. I'm from Croton, with the United Pro-Life Committee in Gannett. It's interesting how Democrats run things in this state. 3 more state senators or former state senators are going to go to jail. People from Mount Vernon will know this guy well, Larry Sieber. Remember him? He was a state assemblyman, a state senator, And you just can't keep these guys out of helping the public and public service while they're helping themselves. New York City councilman. Then there's the Queen of Queens, Shirley Huntley, who's been helping herself for years, only they caught her for a little misdemeanor, $30,000. Then was Senator Carl Kruger. Now, if you remember, Kruger voted against gay marriage. Then the homosexuals picketed his home for a year and said his girlfriend really wasn't his girlfriend and he was really gay. Remember that? The homosexuals picketed him for a year, outing him supposedly, but then his girlfriend showed up on the Senate floor. Well, he doesn't have to worry about being a senator anymore because he'll be in jail. This is a long list of public officials who've gone to jail in this state, and it will continue as long as the state, the county, are run this way. They're sort of run like the city of Chicago, aren't they? Now we have Chicago and Washington. There will never be any true reform in this state or in this county while the Democratic Party runs the county or the state. Never. They will never reform pensions. They will never reform Medicaid. And they never will stop the killing of unborn children. Matter of fact, we have a member here. Remember the Democratic onslaught against pro-lifers where they attempted to put pro-lifers in jail for speaking out in public? Imagine that, on the sidewalk, out in front of an abortion mill. Try to put us in jail, free speech violations. We know that several of the members are members of Planned Parenthood. Matter of fact, one of them sitting in front of me was a death escort, open the door, bring the people in to get the abortions, triplets, twins, you name it, get them inside, late abortions, early abortions. It was interesting that the abortion mills that particular person were affiliated was in a college town right next to the Pennsylvania state line. So not only were they aborting college girls, it was one of the series of clinics that they passed a federal law for that did not allow people, adults, to take children across the state line and abort them in the state of New York. She was a death escort there at one of those mills that specialized in that process. And the case came about at the federal level because the mother of the rapist took the girl from Pennsylvania across the state line and had her aborted in Binghamton, New York. Isn't it interesting? So, when we look at the activity of this board and the photographs that Planned Parenthood has of the members of this board and the members of the Assembly and the members of the State Senate, we know, because Planned Parenthood blocked it, there will never be an investigation of how Planned Parenthood has failed to report cases of incest and rape in this state because they have the power to block the law.
Mr. Riley, please
They'll
wrap it
never
up.
investigate, as 3 states had, including Illinois, the massive Medicaid fraud that's going on in Texas, Indiana, and it can't be Republican, Chicago, Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chairman, I have no other cards.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. You know what, members, if you do not mind, I think we should take one item out of order so we can send the board members back to their stated meeting, if that is all right with Mr. Harcum and Mr. Mazzano.
Yes, that's fine, sir.
I believe that's item number 29, Madam Clerk. No, can't be. 24, item 24. So before we do our unfinished business, members, we're going to item 24 in the regular order business. Thank you.
Item 5429 from the Committee on Budget and Appropriations is an act authorizing the County of Westchester to intervene in the proceedings pending in the Westchester County Supreme Court entitled Signature Flight Support Corporation versus Town of Rye, and/or commence an action for declaratory judgment concerning Signature Flight support corporations' New York real property tax law, Article 7, review of its tax assessment, and authorize the designation and retention of Oxman, Toulis, Kirkpatrick, Wyatt, and Geiger to represent the County of Westchester in the proceedings at no cost to the county for such legal services.
Ms. Meyer.
Yes, thank you very much. This is an act that has been reviewed actually twice in budget and appropriations because of the breadth and the complexity of the issue. We went into executive session at the first discussion because there was quite a bit of information that was confidential that we needed to discuss with regards to this. And this came back onto the agenda this morning, where we discussed all of the ramifications, and indeed there are many. But the committee did pass this forward to the full board. Several members did vote it out without prejudice. There were some nays, there were some ayes. But this definitely has received its very, very great due diligence and should not be taken lightly, nor should it be taken as something that sets precedents, but should be looked at as it's standing on its own. So moved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Members on this item. Mr. Gelfarb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would first like to thank the chairwoman of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, Ms. Myers, and the deputy chairman, Ms. Marcotte.
Just, thank you.
I'm a little taller than the mic, so. Once again, I would like to thank Budget and Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Ms. Myers, Deputy Chairman of the Budget and Appropriation Committee Ms. Marcotte, for rapidly getting this matter to the floor. It really just took one day, boom, it's here. I really appreciate that. The taxpayers of Blindbrook School District appreciate that. The taxpayers of the town of Rye appreciate that. The taxpayers of the village of Rybrook appreciate that. And the taxpayers of the county of Westchester appreciate that. So thank you very, very much, Ms. Myers and Ms. Marcotte and the members of the committee for getting this matter onto our agenda tonight. I'd also like to thank Mr. Toulis, Mr. Stark, and Mayor Feinstein for explaining the significance of this bill to the public and to the members of this board. It really was a terrific presentation by each of you. I'd also like to thank Ms. Zarkauer for all the work she has done in helping to explain this to me. She's Sherry Zarkauer, one of the members of the Blindbrook School District. As has been explained, this act will result in no additional cost to the county. The attorneys are already on retainer. They are being paid for in full by the town of Rye. This will present no additional cost to the county. At the same time, this is a county lease. This is county property. The county has a real interest in having the integrity of its agreements upheld and having agreements that it's entered into adhered to, and in explaining and in showing the courts and explaining to its own lessees that a deal is a deal. If you enter into a deal in which you agree to pay taxes and in which you are running a very profitable business, which is great, you should run a profitable business. We want you to employ lots of people, especially people from the county. But at the same time, when you're employing them, you have to understand that just like every other profit-making taxpayer, you're going to have to pay property taxes. And so I appreciate the work that has been done by the committee and really by the whole board to get this in front of us tonight. At the same time, there's real fiscal ramifications to this. There are real financial ramifications. We've heard about the impact of the tax cap. We all know about the impact of the tax cap. If there is a huge hole in the Blindbrook School District's budget, we just simply can't have the taxes raised to make up for that because, hey, there's a tax cap in effect. That's going to mean layoffs, cuts in programs, firing of teachers, firing of support staff, less services for kids with special needs, less services all around. And why? It's just ridiculous to say, well, gee, hey, let's do that because someone decided to back out of a deal that they freely entered into. At the same time, the village of Rybrook provides essential services, police, fire, and everything else. It too would have to lay off people, provide less services at great, great harm to its residents. The county also is going to suffer a tax hit. It's going to be down hundreds of thousands of dollars in its budget. The county too is under a tax cap. The county too has an awful lot of services to provide. We all deal with the budget of the county every single meeting we have. There's just no reason for the county to take a hit like that. And the town of Rye also, which is sort of an umbrella organization, it too is going to suffer a big hit, and it too cannot just raise taxes to make up for the hit to its budget. So I implore my fellow members to pass this bill. The courts will decide what to do, but as has been explained by Mr. Toulis and everyone else, the county really has an interest separate and distinct from that of the town of Rye, and really the county is required to be in on this in order to affirmatively further its interests and to set forth the need for its agreements to be upheld, while at the same time, of course, all the tax-paying entities that rely on these, tax-receiving entities that rely on these revenues, their interest in obtaining the taxes that are due them and the ability to provide services will be upheld. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to speak, and I hope my fellow members vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Gelfarb. Ms. Shimsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was one of the legislators who voted no in committee today. The reasons for my vote concern less, at least at this point, the substance of the issues than the way this is being done. The Code of Professional Responsibility for the legal profession requires that there be no conflict of interest in a lawyer's representation. That means if a lawyer represents two parties and their interests diverge, there's a real serious problem there, which may or may not be curable by the waiver of one of the parties. Especially since we are not doing this on our own dime. It's not ourselves we are damaging if something goes wrong with this, but it's the county taxpayers and the people of this county. Agreeing to joint representation in potentially problematic situations is not something we should do lightly. This is a situation in which the school district, the village, and the town all have separate legal representation, even though it's hard to imagine a situation in which their interests will diverge. We are the one entity who may have an interest that can diverge, and we're glomming onto one of the other entities. I'm extremely troubled by this. And I'm not completely convinced that there's no risk to the county or the county's taxpayers in this arrangement. This is therefore the hardest vote I've taken since I've been here. I may have voted on bigger issues or smaller issues, but this is the one where I've really had to dig deep to make a final decision. And what I've concluded is this. I don't want to hurt the taxpayers, especially considering how heavily challenged school districts and local governments are by the tax cap. We had a long discussion today with Mr. Toulis. I am not completely convinced, but I do believe that Mr. Toulis is a man of great integrity, as we all do in this chamber. We all know him very well, and we all know he's one of the leading legal practitioners in this county. I am willing to accept this representation because there are unique factual circumstances that could not possibly be replicated again, that suggest that even though this is something we generally should never dream of doing, it's almost certainly okay to a limited extent in this particular case. So I am going to change my vote. I will vote for this tonight, but I do want to do so under two provisos. Number one, Mr. Toulis's representation of this county extends only to the motion to dismiss and only on the one narrow legal issue involved here. If the motion to dismiss is denied, we automatically have to find new counsel or have the county attorney do it. And the second proviso I would make is I will do something I thought I would never do in my life. I will affirmatively cite Bush versus Gore for the proposition that this is a one-time and one-time only situation. This has no precedential value for the future due to the completely unique factual and legal situation we're dealing with here. With those provisos, I will move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shimsky. Other members? Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was in the, we had the discussions at 2 meetings concerning this issue. And I think when you boil it down, there are 2 things. One, the county entered into agreement with Signature Flight. And in that agreement, there was a provision that says that Signature would not assert an exemption. Signature asserted an exemption. And I agree with my colleague, Legislator Gelfar. I believe a deal is a deal. I really strongly believe that that is important in terms of contractual arrangements that people have. And I feel strongly that if you sign a contract, that you are required to abide by the provisions of that contract. So I am troubled that the assertion of a defense that was waived by this company is being asserted at this point. But I want to say that this is not without risk. If anyone believes that this issue is without risk to the county, that is not so. Because why is the county involved? Because the local authorities cannot assert the provision in the contract because they're not parties to the contract. So the county has to be in the lawsuit in order for us to raise this waiver defense against the party here. But the concern I think we had, the concern that the county has to be concerned with, is whether or not the provision in the contract, which I guess Signature is arguing the provision is probably void or voidable against some public policy or some act in terms of the FAA rules, and whether or not having a provision like that can cause the county some problems or issues that will have to be dealt with. So we don't know for a fact that there are no downside. But I certainly believe that when you weigh it, you have to come out to say, look, we signed the contract, it included a provision, and we're going to have to make you abide by that provision, because if we don't do that, then you're going to have a slippery slope the other way, where people are not actually abiding by contractual terms. I want to also express the sentiments by my colleague Legislator Shimsky on this, in that I do believe that the county attorney's office really should have been the attorneys really asserting the county's right here under the intervention motion, as well as the motion to commence an action for a declaratory judgment, which is to declare the provision itself to be valid. And I understand that there's a cost issue, but our cost, this would be done in-house anyway, so we would not have been expending any outside costs. I do think that interest can diverge at some point. I don't think the interest is necessarily at this stage in conflict, but I think it can, depending upon how the litigation evolves. And one is supposed to see that ahead of time and make appropriate decisions in representation. But I will support the legislation because I believe fundamentally that a deal is a deal, and when this contract was signed, they agreed that they would not assert an exemption, and there's no way that we should abide that, even though there might be some downside risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Borgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come at this matter from a slightly different point of view, and that is as a former town supervisor. Recently, in the past several years, all town supervisors are aware that these large tax cert cases had significant financial implications for the town, the county, and in particular the school district, as been stated several times. I too am struggling with this particular matter because I do understand that there are specific elements to this case that are unique, that do perhaps require the county to become a party to this action. However, the county always there's always financial implications to the county for every large tax certiorari case. What I am afraid of with respect to this particular matter is that this sets a precedent that the county, because it does have a financial interest in many tax cert matters, will be requested to or required to act in defense of other municipalities. Now, again, as a former town supervisor, I certainly wish the municipalities and the school district well in the matter of adjudicating this case, and I agree with my colleagues that this does seem to be a matter where our lessee has broken the conditions of the deal, which were understood. Maybe using the current atmosphere of the courts with respect to tax certiorari's to their benefit. I really wish the county had resources to help all municipalities with all their tax cert cases, especially in the town. The town is typically the entity that provides all of the resources to defend tax cert cases, and it's a huge expense for towns, and it's quite a stressor on towns' cash flow when these matters come in, especially because, as you know, towns make both the county and the school districts whole. And of course, as a parent of children in public school, I understand the terrible financial implications that large tax cert matters can have on school districts. However, I do think this does set a precedent. I do think that other towns will have a very valid right to request the county's assistance. In this particular matter, we have an arrangement whereby we wouldn't be hiring outside counsel because the counsel representing the municipality will take this on for free. As some of my other colleagues have mentioned, perhaps that the defense of the county's position is more rightly in the county attorney's office, and I can see other municipalities requesting that service of the county attorney. And as a county legislator and a former local chief elected, I don't really understand what the answer to those municipalities would be that says, in this one case, the financial considerations of this municipality trump the financial considerations, which are equally dire and equally significant in many municipalities in Westchester County, your request. I do understand that there are some technical differences in this case, and that is the reason that I have to say I am not entirely certain yet how I'm going to vote when my turn comes to vote. But I do want my colleagues to consider that we don't do anything in a vacuum. This matter does not exist in a vacuum. There are many, many, many school districts that are implicated by adversely decided tax cert cases, and that it is a possibility that if this passes, that other municipalities will require assistance from the county, because we do have a significant financial interest in many tax cert cases.
Thank you, Ms. Borgia. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I always do, and when appropriate necessary, just a disclosure of the law firm in this case, Oxman, Toulis, Kirkpatrick, Wyatt, and Geiger, LLP, that's the counsel representing the parties, is indicated. I, too, want to just disclose that I work with 2 or more of the named partners. Disclosure is important and appropriate. I do not represent any of the, or work with any of the principals involved in this litigation, and I don't believe that working with counsel that's merely representing these individuals in any way impacts my objective view of this particular matter. With that said, the disclosure is there. Just a brief comment on the substance. I listened carefully to all legislators tonight. I will be supporting this item for the reasons as many of our public speakers tonight indicated, and other colleagues did as well. And I too, as we all are, concerned about the potential precedential nature of this and all other items. I recognize I won't mutter the names, but we recognize the opportunity to occasionally throw your hand up and say, this is out of bounds, and I'm going to declare it as such. But in this case, I don't believe it is precedential because we're dealing with county property per se, airport property. So I think on this particular case, we can certainly have this discussion going forward, but I think on this particular item, we have the opportunity to move forward because of the nature of the parcels involved.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplowitz. Mr. Testa.
I wasn't going to say anything, but, I think I have to say a few things. I've been listening, and I'm going to speak. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, and I think that's an advantage in this case. I don't see what the problem is. This is the nexus of this whole problem is the county contract. Of course, we're involved as a county with certiorari's throughout the county, but they're not based on a contract with the county that has been broken. Simple as that. It's not comparable to other certiorari's in a general nature throughout the county. So I don't see where the conflict is or where the general concern is. So either we want to help these communities out, these school districts out, because we have to be the ones to initiate this because it's a contract with the county property, as Mr. Kaplowitz said. I don't see the problem. I'm going to support this wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testa. Other members? Mr. Mazzano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good debate, colleagues. I'm enjoying listening to everyone make very good points in their talks. I have a couple of points to put on the record. First, I just want to applaud Legislator Gelfarb for fighting for his district and working so hard to get this issue to the floor tonight. And I want to thank the Budget Committee, who really pushed this through and reviewed it in detail. So Legislator Myers and the Budget Committee, thank you for getting this out to the floor tonight. We appreciate it. Legislator Williams, I'm happy to say I agreed with your speech 100%. How about that? Great speech. But you're right. A deal is a deal. A binding contract's a binding contract. The law is the law. We have a county contract at issue here. So if you're looking for the nexus on why the Board of Legislators would enter into this litigation, you have a county contract at the center of this legal dispute. As a matter of fact, I would argue something a little different. We have to get into this case. We have to protect the county's interest when we enter into a contract. That's our job as legislators. We have a duty to protect the county of Westchester. We have a contract here that was a Westchester County contract that this vendor is trying to violate and evade. So it's not just protecting the community, which I'm going to talk about in a second. We've got to protect the county's interests. When we have our county government approve a contract, we can't stand by idly when some vendor tries to get out of the contract and at the same time really severely damage the tax base of some of our local governments. So to me, I'm able to vote for this fairly easily because this issue lands squarely on the county's turf. It's the county airport. The county airport sits in the village of Rybrook. But never forget, it's a county airport. It's a county facility. It's our facility. And if something happens on our turf at our airport that's going to damage local governments, and the most, as we all know, all of our local governments are really hurting on tax revenues right now. If there's an action that's going to severely damage the local taxpayers and local governments, in my view, we have to get involved to protect those local governments. So that's why I'm voting yes, because this happened on county property. This vendor is trying to evade a county contract, and all of this that happened on county property is hurting local governments in Westchester that are having a hard enough time as it is to balance their budgets. So I will be voting on this. I do not believe this creates any precedential problem because all of this issue revolves around a county contract on county property. Had that not been the case, I think we would be taking a closer look at the precedential value. But that's not the case. We have county action on county contract on county land. And that's why this doesn't create any special precedent. And I don't think any conflict has yet been cited, so we can certainly enter to this legal representation. And if a conflict arises at a later date, our attorneys will have to recognize that and deal with it at that time. It happens all the time in the legal world. So there's no conflict, there's no precedent. We have to protect our county contracts, and we have to protect these local governments that will get so damaged by this action by this vendor. So to me, it's a pretty easy vote. I feel very strongly we should enter into this litigation to protect these local governments, protect the county interests. So Legislator Gelfarb, I'm with you on this one.
Mr. Harcum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with my colleague. This has been a very entertaining and I mean that in a serious sense, interesting debate. And it's really hard to disagree with anything that's been said. We want to protect the taxpayers of the local municipality and of the county. It is a county asset. We do have a duty and a responsibility to protect county taxpayers and protect our legal rights. I think what is making some people uncomfortable about this, I know it is me, and I've heard others express this, is it's just not clean. We're kind of piggybacking with a municipality with another firm. It's almost like sleeping on somebody else's couch, when you're too old to be crashing on somebody's couch. And I have some recent experience with that, believe me. This is accurate. We should be protecting our property. But that's why we have a county attorney's office. And I think that's what makes me uncomfortable about this. I'm going to support this for all the reasons that my colleagues have cited. But I think we really, unfortunately, we didn't have the time because the 15th is the deadline. But when we, in the future, have issues where legal matters and property and financial interests, real financial interests of Westchester are on the line, that's why we have a county attorney's office. You know, we shouldn't be bumming a ride with somebody else, so to speak, to get these things done. We have excellent attorneys in-house. If we need to protect our rights, we need to protect our rights and do it appropriately. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other members, thank you so much. And it has been a good debate, and as it should be. First, I'd like to thank Legislator Myers today for taking this item on at our suggestion at the last minute today. It was not on the agenda, but we were reminded by the mayor and by the Board of Trustees and the school superintendent that this was, the time was going to run out on this particular thing. So Chair Myers, thank you so much for you and your committee taking that up in the committee today. That's why I appeared that it was walked out or without prejudice to get it on the floor so we can have this discussion tonight to be able to do that. So thank you so much for making that happen. As the Majority Leader, Leader Harcum, just summed up, I think the biggest concern for everyone is not the substance. I think there is no one here that is opposed to trying to protect not only the county interest, but also the interest of the taxpayers, especially in the school district that, based on the numbers we were given, at least I was given from the county attorney's office, seemed to be at least a $1.2 million hit on one of the actions just on the school district's portion, on the reimbursement. And when we had the initial discussion, and to the county attorney's credit, by the way, when I asked the question of the county attorney to understand what was going on, him and Carol Arcuri, Bob Meehan and Carol Arcuri actually got the financial data because I wanted to understand the impact on the county, which Bob Meehan sent me on Saturday. So there's been a lot of work on this. Everyone should be congratulated for that part. But more importantly, the concern that all of us have is not about the issue. It was more that our county attorney wasn't representing county property. So for the future, we all will work together to make sure that that gets done. With that, Madam Clerk, a long roll call vote, please. First quarter is almost over.
Mr. Harcum.
Yes.
Mr. Maisano.
Yes.
Ms. Borgia. Yes. Mr. Burrows. Yes. Mr. Gelfarb. Aye. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Aye.
Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Shimsky.
Aye.
Ms. Spreckman. Mr. Testa.
Yes.
Ms. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Approved 16-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you, members, for allowing us to take those items out of order. Madam Clerk, back to the regular order of business, please. Thank you.
Under unfinished business, please note the first 5 items under unfinished business were on the July 30th, 2012 special board meeting and were postponed to a date certain of September 10th, 2012, and appear here as items of unfinished business for action. The first one is item 5121 from the Committees on Budget and Appropriations and Government Operations, an act authorizing Westchester County to enter into an intermunicipal agreement with the City of Yonkers, whereby the county would finance certain infrastructure improvements and be granted an easement to access said improvements in support of a fair and affordable housing development to be known as Warburton Riverview Apartments, located in the city, and accept such property rights.
Ms. Borgia? Ms. Myers?
Yes, this has passed through Budget and Appropriations, and I will, because of the nature of this, I will turn this over to Legislator Borgia.
Ms. Borgia.
Thank you. Little stage direction change. I wasn't expecting that. This is a matter that has come before Government Operations, as Legislator Myers said, about 3 or 4 times. This is an agreement that was made at least a year ago that the county would finance infrastructure improvements, namely a parking garage, and be granted an easement to said improvements as part of a deal for an affordable housing development, which has been completed in the city of Yonkers. After much discussion back and forth, we have passed this out of Government Operations, and I'd like to move this item now on the floor.
Mr. Kaplowitz. Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Borgia. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Excuse me, sir. No, to the chairs, did we get, one of the concerns I had, the only concern I had was the draft IMA listed a shorter number of years where the affordable housing is 30 plus 20, I believe, which is the arrangement with Yonkers. But the draft IMA, I think, had 15 or 20 years, which would potentially leave it to the point where after that number of years, the people with the parking, the housing would get kicked out, and then the parking would go back to market. So did we ever get that corrected? Because I think they clearly have to match up, so we get a full value for our investment, because we're putting significant dollars into this. So that was my only question substantively on it.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplowitz. I'm just trying to read a note here regarding that particular item. Mr. Kaplowitz raised the point, and he raised it a while ago, that I thought we had addressed on this to make sure that it was consistent with all the other IMAs that we have had on the housing, on these housing items. And it appears, at least from Ms. Ramos, who's from the County Attorney's Office, point, that it was not an issue to change the amount of time. So, Mr. Kaplowitz, a motion would be in order, Mr. Kaplowitz.
We got a lot of things we could do.
That would be a motion to change the...
change the draft IMA. I mean, that's kind of, wow, we can just do that on the floor. Okay.
We can do anything on the floor, Mr. Kaplowitz, you know that.
Unanimous consent, we could change. Right, almost anything. I mean, the point is, we're trying to comport the draft IMA terms of affordability to parallel the affordability for the underlying project. So if the draft IMA can read, then I believe it's again 30 plus 20 years, 30 being the affordability period, 20 years that those who are in that housing can't be kicked out for that 20 years. It would be then paralleling those who have parking spaces because they are in the housing. In the 30th year, would be able to have as many as another 20 years to be able to keep that parking space. And then it would go back onto market as time went on. So, but of course, the draft IMA has to be 2 parties agreeing to it. It's our proposal, but the other side have to agree to it. So the question is, even if we, a legislative body, change our desire and want the draft IMA to say, how are we assured that when the IMA becomes real and not draft, that the 2 periods do line up?
Because Mr. Kaplowitz just for notice purposes, what the county attorney's office does and what the Board of Acquisition and Contract is responsible to do is to make sure that the actions of the Board of Legislators are reflected in the final legislation, in the final documents as they would be seen fit. So whether it's an IMA, a contract, or anything like that, whatever the board's actions are should be finally reflected in the document as it states at the end. So if that is what your pleasure is, Mr. Kaplowitz.
Again, just one legislator, I would certainly like to do that. The only concern I have is certainly the legislative record then. If I ask for a draft IMA to be revised as part of the legislative record, but does that rise to a level that either binds county attorney's office to effectuate, or if in fact it is not agreed to by the other party, is that material enough so that the agreement would not move forward in its entirety because that one, what I would argue is material and central piece, is not included in the ultimate negotiations. So I guess through to the chair, to the county attorney, even if we do effectuate, do set out our intent, and the record is pretty clear, but either through A&C or through the county attorney's office, does that bind them to that very material term?
Ms. Caplis, what we would be doing is if that was your motion, we could have an accepting of that motion, then the legislators would be changing the legislation right on the floor.
Well, that's the question. What are we changing? The draft IMA is a term, it's a section number. Are we going to, committee report we can't do, so we can't effectuate our policy through that. The legislation, is this the, we have the item, I don't have before me, sir, so I apologize, but is there some way to amend the legislation itself beyond just the draft IMA?
That would
This
be
is a concern that Legislator Abenanti had often, which was that we should not be approving blanket draft IMAs until we get the final terms, right? And then it comes back to us, because we've had circumstance in the past where we've approved draft IMAs and we've set out all the terms, and then lo and behold, the actual IMA, when they get down to the negotiating table, is different than what we've approved. This, I think, is really important. I feel strongly about it. I'm sure my colleagues do. We're putting in over $2 million. We want people to be able to take advantage of parking. Free parking, not free parking, but yeah, free parking if you, in fact, are in the affordable housing. Can you imagine a situation where the final agreement doesn't include that, and after 15 years they're kicked out of and then have to go rent a space in this parking lot when, in fact, what did the taxpayers get for the $2 million investment? We didn't get what we thought we were going to get. So I will amend. You tell me what I'm amending, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Gablich, you said that you are amending the terms in the agreement to be 30 years?
That the terms of the agreement match up to, that mirror the 30 plus 20 years in the affordable housing agreement with Warburton. If that's in the draft IMA, if that's in the committee report, if that's in the legislation, wherever it goes, that's my motion, sir.
Like it would be in the actual legislation. The committee report is the committee report. If there's a second on that motion.
Second.
It's seconded by Mr. Williams. Usually, you know that when we do this, we would have acceptance from the committee chair to make those motions on the floor. So there are two committees that this comes out of. The Committee on Government Operations. Madam Chair, Chair Borgia, what is your pleasure on the acceptance of that modification?
I would like to accept it, especially in light of the fact that at the committee meeting, the municipality agreed to it.
Okay, that sounds that Ms. Myers, as Chair of Budget and Appropriations.
Yes, I definitely would accept this for the same reasons that Legislator Borgia mentioned.
So the modification is that the 30 years, so let's do a long roll call vote, Madam Clerk, on the modification to the legislation that is previously in front of us right now to change the terms to be reflective of what is been consistent, which is 30 years of affordability and then 20 years after that for those individuals that are present in the IMA that is before us this evening. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Harcum.
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano. Yes. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. Yes. Mr. Gelfarb. Aye. Mr. Kaplowitz. Aye. Ms. Marcotte. Aye. Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Shibsky.
Aye.
Ms. Spreckman. Yes. Mr. Testa. Yes. Ms. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Yes. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Approved 16-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. That means the amendment is what is currently in front of us right now. Other members on this particular item, on the amended item. Unless there's, Madam Clerk, long roll call vote
Mr. Harcum.
on the actual legislation. Long roll call on the actual legislation at this point in time,
Mr. Harcum.
as amended.
Mr. Mazzano. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. Mr. Gelfarb. Mr. Kaplowitz. Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Shibsky.
Aye.
Ms. Spreckman. Mr. Testa. Ms. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Approved 12-4. Item 5122 from the Committees on Budget and Appropriations and Government Operations is a bond act authorizing the issuance of $2,750,000 in bonds of the county to finance capital project BPL 01 Warburton Riverview Apartments, Yonkers.
Ms. Myers?
Yes, as previously discussed, this is the bond act that would authorize the issuance of the $2,750,000 to finance this capital project. So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Members on this item? Unless there's objection, member will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of this item. So ordered.
Approved 12-4. Item 5260 from the Committee on Budget and Appropriations is an act amending Act Number 1952, which amended Act Number 40, 1941, entitled An Act Establishing Personnel Rules in Westchester County Service and Adopting Classification of Positions and Schedules of Pay.
Ms. Myers?
Yes, this was an item that was brought to us earlier this summer, which, with regards to bringing the District Attorney's Office pay plan in line with the approved Teamsters contract, which had been approved, I guess it was at the end of the spring, I think. And so this was consequently something that came before us so that they could be brought in line with the Teamsters contract, and was duly discussed and approved out of Budget and Appropriations for approval by this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Members on this item? Madam Clerk, a long roll call vote.
Mr. Harkam.
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. Mr. Gelfarb. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Aye.
Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Shimsky.
Aye.
Ms. Breckman. Mr. Testa.
No.
Ms. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Approved 10-6. Item 5340 from the Committee on Budget and Appropriations is an act authorizing the transfer of funds between various county departments in the amount of $6,178,058.
Ms. Myers?
Yes, this was an act made necessary, as it is every year, by the need to close out the previous year's budget and to transfer monies between various departments in terms of closing everything out. And the Board of Legislators, the Committee on Budget and Appropriations listened to the Finance Commissioner and the Budget Department on this and voted it out for approval by the Board of Legislators. Thank you.
Members on this item? Mr. Maison?
Yes, Mr. Chair. A little bit of a difference of opinion on this one. The administration sent down these interdepartmental budget changes to close out 2011, as Legislator Myers described. But the committee added another $259,000 to the act relating to summer youth programs, which of course is certainly a noble goal, and we understand that. Unfortunately, despite the good intentions of the board, we believe the change that was made by the committee to be both contrary to law and now currently moot. Budget amendments must originate from the county executive's office. This one didn't. That's why we think there's legal issues with what is being tried here. And number two, the certified annual financial report has already been issued. The books are now closed. The auditors have certified the books. So for those two reasons, despite we understand the goal of the committee in trying to move these monies to the summer youth programs, we believe in this case, both as a matter of law and mootness, it's too late for this legislation the way it was designed, and therefore we will vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maizano. Members on this item? Madam Clerk? Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for, no, okay, long roll call vote. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Kaplowitz.
Mr. Harkam.
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. Mr. Gelfarb. Mr. Kaplowitz. Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Shimsky.
Aye.
Ms. Breckman. Mr. Testa. Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Approved 9-7. Item 5423 from the Committee on Budget and Appropriations is a resolution to classify certain funds in the fund balance of the general fund of the County of Westchester for fiscal year ending December 31st, 2011.
Ms. Myers?
Yes, this is an item that is here again as an item of unfinished business for action that came before us in July. This is the result of a reclassification that was allowed by GASB 54, where funds were moved from previously assigned to now being reflected as committed. So the end number was the same, it just was a way to show basically the positioning of funds as we move forward. And it was approved by Budget and Appropriations and moved forward for approval by the Board of Legislators.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. So moved. Members on this item. Ms. Marcotte?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, the Republican caucus cannot support this resolution in its current form. While we have been staunch supporters of safeguarding our fund balance, and we will continue to do so, we do believe that this resolution, as proposed, while perhaps well-intentioned, has the potential of triggering further downgrades from the rating agency. So we would urge our colleagues not to support this, or at the very least consider changing the verbiage or the text of the terminology that categorizes some of the funding, which we believe is going to be a problem with the rating agency. So we will not be supporting it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Marcotte. Mr. Kaplowitz?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is, Jim was very excited about earlier debate. I get very excited about numeric debates. It is about arithmetic, in case we haven't heard that in a while. The part of this resolution that gives me quite a bit of trouble, it actually concerns me quite a bit, is the second whereas on the second page, whereas this honorable board also finds that allocating fund balance funds to budget stabilization under a committed classification is in the best interest of the county, and Moody's rating agency favorably reviewed a similar allocation for Arlington County, Virginia, and affirming that county's AAA bond rating, et cetera. That really goes to the heart of whether this is going to hurt us or help us. Clearly, this is medicine, and the GASB 54 is one that we're going to have to live under and want to live under, and actually it looks like it's going to give some good guidance moving forward. I'm just wondering if this is a little bit too premature. And back it up to a conversation, actually a resolution that this board considered earlier this year that went to the heart of discussions with the rating agencies, and there was some discussion that the county board, through the budget chair, through the chair of the board itself, must be on phone calls and correspondence with. My understanding is, and correct me if somebody could, that we really don't have an answer to the two parts of this question. That we really haven't asked Moody's or S&P or Fitch whether, in fact, A, this classification is appropriate, and B, back to the math, whether we then utilize this classification and take it then out of an undesignated category, are we harming our undesignated reserve mathematically as a percentage of what is appropriate and necessary? And I think until we get the answer to both those questions, we don't know whether what is well-intentioned and certainly I think gives more guidance. None of us want to see some of these allocations unless we in the future decide that it would be appropriate to move what would be now the terminology would be committed monies to other uncommitted or to other committed lines. That's a good thing, but are we harming ourselves in the process? So I can't support this resolution. It is just a resolution too. I'm not sure it rises to enough effect budgetarily to do what we wanted to do. So for all those reasons, I think it being September and this season coming around in November and December, we'll have a chance to meet with the auditors and move into the 2013 year where we can now fully implement GASB 54, not just in this area, but all the other areas of commitment.
Mrs. Myers, let's go around first, right? Unless you were responding to a question.
I was.
I understand. Ms. Myers.
Yes, I would just like to add that I was privy to a phone conversation that was held with one of the rating agencies on behalf of our budget staff within the Board of Legislators, and all of Mr. Kaplowitz's concerns were answered favorably to this resolution, where we were assured that this was definitely something that we could do, and was in keeping with safeguarding all of these measures and in keeping with GASB 54. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. GASB 54, as we know, when it came out, really reclassified fund balances, and the committed category is a more conservative way of actually putting away money, so that it's not there to be used, and it can be used for the purpose for which you have established it. I think the question, and I think that really this goes to, is the adequacy, first of all. If you have money bulk into one account called unassigned, you're supposed to now be more transparent. You're supposed to determine how much is really should be for that reserve by having a calculation or some way of showing what the actual reserve is. Then you're supposed to then determine how much you want to lock away for budget stabilization, so that you're not have funds set aside with no particular purpose that can be dipped into. And I think that's what we're trying to get to. We have had in the Government Reform and Efficiency Committee over the last 2 meetings, we've had detailed discussions. And we go back and forth with trying to come to a rational basis of how the fund balance should be classified. And I think we've been working very closely with the Finance Commissioner in going through the GASB rules, because I think the GASB rules are very clear in terms of what and the committed category is where we should be striving to in order to make sure that the county is on solid footing. The whereas clause that Legislator Kaplowitz referred to is exactly on point, because it was done. In other words, this reallocation was done in the Arlington County financials when they adopted 54. And they moved funds from stabilization to the committed category. And the rating agency did review that reclassification and concluded that Arlington was entitled to to maintain a AAA bond rating. So while I understand that we've got to be careful about how we move things around, we also have to look at the facts of what is happening out there, in that the guidance comes in terms of, well, the rating agencies are going to downgrade us. That kind of conclusion cannot withstand analysis if you're looking at what items they looked at in determining their rating. No one can read the minds of a rating agency, but clearly the data, the financial data that they follow are in the public domain. They're in the public domain. If you go on Moody's website and you print out a lot of these, because I've done it, print out a lot of these counties' Moody's rating, and you read through it, they give you a sense of exactly what they're looking at. And I think this is somewhat of I'm surprised that we don't have much support for going in this direction. I would have thought that we would, given that GASB 54 has given us a way to be more conservative in our fund balance management.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Harcum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. The notion was raised, what do the rating agencies think about this? We haven't spoken with them. Well, indeed, we have. As the chair of the Budget Committee pointed out, she was on one of those conversations. Our budget staff had several conversations. This was discussed at great length in the Committee on Budget and Appropriations. Not only would this not be looked upon unfavorably, it would be this is exactly what they're looking for, the responsible targeting of reserves And that's why Gatsby was laid out this way in the new regulations. So this takes us exactly in the direction we want to go. You know, I think this whole question of fund balance is something that we need to have a reasoned and rational debate over and a policy over, instead of, you know, this kind of hysteria on a roadshow that's being taken around with PowerPoints, you know, at this county looming fiscal disaster with the fund balance. You know, we questioned the director of finance about that the other day. She said that didn't come from my office. You know, our auditors and the professionals look at 5%. We're well above 5%. We had a $135 million surplus last year. $135 million surplus. Please, let's have a policy, but let's stop with this, the sky is falling, we're about to go over the cliff. We're not about to go over the cliff. And this takes us down the road a little further to more fiscal sanity in targeting the reserves to the appropriate accounts, and it'll be looked upon favorably, not unfavorably. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Marcotte.
Thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't put this on the record. And to Legislator Harkin's point and to Legislator Myers' point, I have to tell you that the Republican caucus certainly would love to be in agreement on this, would love to move forward with you on this, and we agree that this is something that we should most definitely do going forward in the future. However, I must tell you that it is a concern with regard to what the rating agencies, how they may view this. And so I'm delighted, of course, to learn that there was a conversation with the rating agencies. However, Republican caucus was not privy to any of that information. Had we had that information, quite possibly we might be supporting it. It wasn't shared with us, it wasn't emailed to us, we weren't invited on the phone call, so this is news to me. So I just wanted to put that on the record because we share the same concerns as you. But absent that, we discussed it at length, but there was no confirmation that the rating agencies were okay with the terminology currently being used in the policy. If the conversation took place by a phone call after that, it wasn't relayed back to us. And I'm not blaming anybody, it's just miscommunications. I think it should have been shared with this caucus. Perhaps we would have been voting with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marcotte. I believe in watching the video of the meeting that the information was stated. I'm not positive who was at that meeting, so I'm casting dispersion on anyone, but I know that at least 2 meetings, especially the one with Commissioner Berg, talked about the particular thing when she wanted to go back to the rating agency, that during that meeting she was advised that the board indeed did speak to Moody's on that specific topic, and she wanted the opportunity to go back to them and to talk to them some more. So it has been stated on the record several times that had happened, and we know that was something that was a request. Mr. Mazzano, yes, you have preference, and then I'm going to go to Ms. Borgia.
Just quickly, I think the point Legislator Marcotte's trying to make, I don't think anybody here is denying the legislator said they were in a conversation, I recognize that. But you can't hold these conversations in a vacuum. There's 17 legislators. And part of interviewing a rating agency is allowing people to ask questions. Frankly, I might have asked some pretty darn good questions if I was involved in that might have led to a different opinion here tonight. So when we're having these very, very important conversations, we should try to be as inclusive as possible to get different points of view and different legislators involved in the process. So I think that's the point Legislator Marcotte's trying to drive home, is that while we appreciate some legislators may have been involved with a call to rating agency, having not been on that call and not engaged with the rating agencies, it's hard to accept every word in this resolution and the thoughts in those who are supporting its minds. More of us would like to be involved in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazzano, Mr. Harkin, and Ms. Borgia. Sorry. And
thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just be very, very brief. Any suggestion to improve communication is always welcome, and we should always strive as a body to be as inclusive and you know, the left hand needs to know what the right hand is doing, no pun intended. But I thought it was discussed at the Budget Appropriations Committee I could be mistaken, but I think, as the chair mentioned, it might have been 1 or 2 meetings it was discussed at. So if your members were at that meeting, you know, perhaps Legislator Smith was there. I know he's not here tonight. We can double check on that, but I think it was discussed at community.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to save my comment. I'm going to save my comment for that at the end because there's certainly something about that. Ms. Borgia, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so happy to say that I agree with the minority leader that we should have many people involved in these important conversations. I recall a conversation in this chamber where that wasn't the opinion of all of the legislators, in fact, where there was an opinion stated that no legislator should be involved in the conversation with the rating agencies. So I'm glad to see that we all agree that more information is better. I certainly have always conducted my public service career with that goal in mind. I hearken again back to my days as town supervisor. When I took office in the town of Ossining, prior boards had made decisions that were within their purview to make that actually decimated the fund balance of the town of Ossining over the course of about 8 years, from a very healthy, 18, 20% of our operating budget down to basically a deficit budget, which I was handed as I took office. And for that reason, I think the allocation of money for things that you know you're going to have expenses on is a very, very, very financially prudent thing to do. In my term of office as town supervisor, I did have, we had an extensive committee and extensive work by the town board to craft a fund balance policy that actually looked at some of the specific expenses that we know municipalities have and tried to set policies that would encourage future boards to set aside the funds for those so that we didn't find ourselves in the same situation that I inherited when I took office. So for that reason, I'm totally in support of this resolution, and I'm also totally in support of additional communication. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Chance stand a second time. The whole point is that this resolution then does not embody and talk about, memorialize the fact that these conversations occurred. It talks about Arlington County, Virginia. And if in fact we had a conversation here, I think that is pretty central. Certainly it would be important, step one. Step two, that is one rating agency. I mean, Fitch and S&P are obviously two of the others. And, you know, clearly they make their own decisions and they're slightly different on their methodology, but that would be important as well. And the third part, and the direct question, was the question asked, not is it better to do a committed versus an undesignated, but that in this particular case, if we go to a committed with $28 million, and we then take our undesignated from $135 million down by the $28 million to $107 million, does that trigger in of itself a mathematical review or a downgrade on a percentage basis? That's the direct question to Moody's, to S&P, to Fitch's, and that would be the, and if that question's been asked and we have that answer, I think that would be germane as well. So not could we do it, and as Mr. Williams indicated, the Vice Chair, yes, it is appropriate. This gives further guidance. This is a good thing, doing this. You know, there's nothing wrong with doing this. We just don't want to take medicine that, in fact, winds up hurting us. That's the concern that I and perhaps other colleagues have.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplowitz. Other members?
Just one quick point, Mr. Chairman. Just point
On the
of
Rogalski rule.
That the calculation that looks at the amounts of fund balance aggregates all of these accounts together. So it's just geography between which one account and another. It doesn't change the percentage of the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Other members? Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, I don't believe this discussion was held in budget. I believe it was held in Mr. Williams's committee, which government reform, efficiency, and savings. I'm not a member of that committee. These committees are open to the public. They're streamed live so people can see them. I don't know which Republicans. Maybe you can give me your hand if you are a member of that committee. It does seem to me that there were two very lengthy, very thorough meetings on this, where all of these questions were asked by board members, And as I mentioned before, I'm not a member of the committee, but I felt it was important enough to go there, to listen and participate, especially if I had a question. But it was a very good back and forth. I do know that some of the members, if I'm not mistaken, I believe our colleague from Mount Pleasant is a member of the committee, and that one or two of you maybe also. But I don't believe you were able to stay for the entire meeting, and I'll stand corrected if that's a mistake, but I don't believe you were able to stay for what turned out to be a very good discussion that dealt on a number of these very important points that have to do with what we can do with respect to how we account for our fund balance in light of GASB 54. And also, you know, the rating agency, the independent raters, they don't live in a vacuum. They're aware of this stuff. They know of the changes. And they know of the new categories. So it's not like they're kind of out on an island someplace. We have to try to communicate with them by a note in the bottle and see if we can summon them to a meeting. I wasn't in on the conference call. Over the years, I've been involved in quite a few calls with rating agencies and the positions I've held. But the thing is this: the important points that we were discussing with our finance commissioner, who does talk to them with regularity. Important points had to do with one of the new categories that we wanted to get a handle on. That was the committed classification. And I think the most important point I can add to this conversation tonight is this. We were concerned, especially when we know that there are external decisions, external parties that state, for example, that might somehow encumber the resource that we have. There's a difference between that and decisions that are made internally. And in the committed, although the committed is a very important decision made by the highest of decision-making authority within this government, it was clear, not because we said so as a board, but because we were in agreement with the professional that is in this county that has to weigh on this also in a very substantial way, and her dealings with the rating agencies, that the committed classification was not money that we would see somehow impact us in a negative way because of our ability to change that commitment. In the same way we commit funds, we can uncommit them. And the ability to do that as the ultimate authority within this government, and seeing as how it's all an internal decision. We don't rely on the feds or the state to sign off on this. This kind of brought greater clarity to how the committed classification, together with assigned and unassigned, made up really the big number that we're always concerned about when we are talking with the independent raters about what it is that we have and what they consider as they evaluate us for the continuation of our AAA. So I think that we had both the administration and the legislature together at that table, very, very concerned about the importance of keeping strong with respect to our fund balance, and how we were going to possibly rearrange things from an accounting standpoint because of the new classifications that were in place. But quite honestly, I don't think many of us left that room puzzled by any of these things. Are they new? Yes, they're new. Is it easy enough to understand the difference between external forces that impact us and internal decisions that we are to make? Sure it is. And does it have any relevance when we're discussing the committed classification? Of course it does. The other two were easy enough to understand. The committed was the third piece of it that we wanted to make sure we had a handle on. So for those reasons, I mean, I read through this. I'm going to support this resolution. And I would just reemphasize once again that this was an important topic. Committee devoted I thought, a lengthy period of time on 2 separate occasions with the professional in this government that's charged with the responsibility of keeping up with this day to day and talking to the rating agencies about the impact on the government of the things we do when we're talking about our finances. So I don't know. I'll be supporting it. I urge any that are available, attend these meetings. They're very informative.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Let me just wrap up. One, there is GASB 54 is not a secret document. It is a document that was available online. The people that brought it to our attention, by the way, were our outside auditors. Our outside auditors, when they came to do the presentation on the draft document that represented the comprehensive annual financial statement or comprehensive annual financial report for the County of Westchester, lovingly called the CAFRA, talked to us about this new category called committed. So the committed versus assigned. So assigned just puts a number on it and says, hey, you know what? We think we might use these dollars for a specific category. Last year, we saw the example where we had to make a $91 million transfer when someone said, hey, you know what? We're just going to take that money and use it any way that we would like to. So GASB, in the transparency world that we were living in, created this committed fund balance category to do exactly which every member, bar none, on the floor tonight has said, was to establish the beginnings of a fund balance policy. Now, it's not as detailed as I know that both several members have proposed, as detailed as the legislation that Ms. Borgia had in Ossining as far as a fund balance policy, but our outside auditors, the people we hire, the board hires, to do the audit for the County of Westchester on behalf of the citizens, advised us about this committed category, which brings us to item number 2. Item number 2 on that was that we could not go backwards. So fund balance is fund balance. The question was raised by our outside auditors because we thought we would have to do that as part of our CAFRA transfers. And what we were advised by the professionals was, no, fund balance is fund balance. It's not fund balance for 2011, not fund balance for 2010, it's fund balance. And the time to do that is before the budget process starts, which is very important because that's the question that was asked, that we needed to make a designation of things that were going to be in the committed category, which are amounts constrained to specific purposes by a government itself, using its highest level of decision-making authority, that's this board, and reported as committed. Amounts cannot be used for any other purpose unless the government takes the same highest level action to remove or change the constraint. That was the question that was posed to the rating agencies. And while we had 3 that we are major rating agencies, we asked them that question just because we were all concerned about that. It came from the committee meeting. The members in that committee meeting, when the item was not moved forward, asked that question, because they were advised in the committee meeting that this might have an impact on our fund balance, our rating, a negative outlook. And the only one that gave that negative outlook to us was Moody's, right? Which is why we spoke to Moody's, to understand that. And as Ms. Borgia, I believe, pointed out, that there was significant discussion at multiple locations, including at, let's see if I remember right, the County Association breakfast, where there was a big discussion about the fact that this board, with the freshman legislature group, that there was a big discussion about this board's desire to be part of those calls which were impacting the County of Westchester based on what someone said. and that we did not want to be in that position, and we talked about having the chair of the board, the chair of budget and appropriations. We had good conversations with both former budget chairman Mike Kaplowitz and former chairman of this board, immediate past chairman of this board, Mr. Ryan, on those conversations that had taken place in the past. So this new category was helpful to say that this board would have this initial fund balance policy. The Arlington reference was because in the committee meeting, it was suggested that by creating this committed category, that we might be negatively impacting that. So a search was ensued that was to identify another AAA bonded county that had committed fund balance, which Arlington, Virginia not only had just committed fund balance, they also had this line in it called budget stabilization. So if you think about it conceptually, the undesignated fund balance, which remains, because that did not change, the only thing that changed was the assigned category moving from assigned to committed. So there was no changes. There was no changes in it. The only difference now is that this board, should this item be approved tonight, are saying the items that were presented to us by the administration in the assigned category will now be committed and cannot be modified without coming back to the Board of Legislators. I don't think anyone is concerned about that and upset about that at all. That means we are all part of the conversation when there's changes that are made, and they're not made in just the executive branch of government. So I know that, again, it was our outside auditors that brought this to our attention. They also cautioned us and said that you can't go backwards, you only can go forward. We also were cautioned and say, when we spoke to Moody's, to say that this was not going to negatively impact our fund balance position because it is taken as a whole, as Mr. Williams pointed out, not as a slice. And quite frankly, from a discussion perspective, since the conversation has changed from the earlier part of the year where it was clear that there was a feeling that no one thought the Board of Legislators should be involved in those conversations with the rating agencies, to a different position that we more want to hear that. We have asked, by the way, for the rating agencies to have that conversation as a overview, because they don't want to do the detail, and we asked for that, and the administration prevented that conversation. So we just need to be consistent on it, that when we have to go out and dig up our own information, that we're asking to have it in the public peruse because we do our business in the public. The fact that this is just simply consistent with what was going on. And just another side note, that we had a note in our CAFRA, which we have never had before. Never had a note from a footnote that indicated that we had an imbalance, an out-of-balance situation in our comprehensive annual financial report. It was the first time anyone has ever noticed and stood that was the case. And that, to me, was be more of a concern, which we indicated, by the way, to leadership, both sides of the aisle, by the way, and to the administration, that was a concern about the other transfer that we just did, that we have never had a situation from our accounting firm position that said we had an imbalance in a department. So with all that said, I hope that everyone could support this particular resolution, that it just says we're committing dollars and now it has to come back to us to uncommit them to something different. If those dollars indeed, by the way, are used for the purposes that they were assigned for in the beginning and now may be committed after this vote, should it be successful, it would be the same thing. It would be no difference. So I'm not quite sure what the concern is there. With that being said, Madam Clerk, long roll call vote.
Mr. Harkam.
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano. No. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. No. Mr. Gelfarb. Mr. Kaplowitz.
No.
Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Perez. Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Shimsky.
Aye.
Ms. Spreckman. Mr. Testa.
No.
Ms. Williams. Mr. Williams. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Approved 9-7. Item 5459 was held over from the August 6, 2012 regular board meeting, appears here as an item of unfinished business for committee referral only.
Mr. Harkam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since an updated version of this has been sent down and approved on the consent agenda, I would move we receive and file this.
Is there a second on that? Second. Madam Clerk, if it's okay with members, I'll take a short roll call vote unless someone wants a long one. Okay. Short roll call vote on the receiving and filing of this item.
Mr. Harkam?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano? Yes. Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Approved 16-0. Under standing committees, item 4996 from the Committees on Government Operations.
Over.
Over, Mr. Harkam. Item 4997 from the Committees on Government Operations.
Over.
Over, Mr. Harkam. Item 5006.
Over.
I'm sorry, you put that over? Ms. Shimsky. Item 5018 from the Committees on Government Operations and Budget and Appropriations. A resolution determining that there will be no significant impact to the environment from capital project RGIP 7, General Infrastructure Active Recreation, Wilson's Woods Park.
Ms. Myers.
Yes, thank you. This actually was submitted by both Government Ops Committee as well as Budget and Appropriations. From the Budget and Appropriations Committee's point of view, this was something that was approved and moved forward. It's the authorization of a bond of $500,000 in bonding for work at Wilson's Wood Park in Mount Vernon, largely including improvements to picnic areas and other active recreation facilities. There's drainage work, site work, new guide rails, gravel parking lot, and this is in keeping with the 2012 capital budget as amended. I would like to now turn this over to Legislator Borgia of Government Operations.
Ms. Borgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Legislator Myers has said, this is to maintain and upgrade the Wilson Woods Park. It does involve some recreation facilities. It involves some infrastructure improvements, some drainage improvements. We did review this in government operations a number of times. There was a little bit of back and forth about what was to be included in this, for these monies. But at the end of the day, we did vote it out of committee and think that this would be a good improvement to this recreation facility.
Thank you, Ms. Borgia. Members, we are on discussion on item number 4, ID number 5018, and item number 5, ID number 5019. Members on this item. Madam Clerk, a long roll call vote.
Mr. Harkam.
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. Mr. Gelfarb. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Aye.
Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Aye.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan. Ms. Shimsky.
Aye.
Ms. Breckman. Mr. Testa.
Yes.
Ms. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Approved 16-0. Item 5019 from the Committees on Government Operations and Budget and Appropriations, a bond act authorizing the issuance of $500,000 in bonds of the county to finance capital project RGIP 7, General Infrastructure, Active Recreation, Wilson's Woods Park.
Ms. Myers.
So moved.
As previously discussed, is so moved. Members, unless there's objection, we'll take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5431 from the Committees on Government Operations and Budget and Appropriations, a resolution determining there will be no negative impact on the environment from the removal of one parcel of property from the Ossining Sanitary Sewer District to Cliff Drive.
Ms. Borgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 Cliff Drive is a parcel that, for which there is not possible to connect up into the sanitary sewer district because of the topography. It makes it very improbable that this would ever be able to connect up to the sewer system. Therefore, I would like to move this item.
Thank you, Ms. Borgia. Is item number 7 connected to this?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, so members, we are on items, we're on discussion for item number 6, which is ID 5431, and item 7, 5432. Any member on those items? Unless there's objection, members will take the prior law roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5432 from the Committees on Government Operations and Budget Appropriations, an act to modify the Ossining Sanitary Sewer District by the removal of one parcel of property located in the town of Ossining, 2 Cliff Drive.
Ms. Borgia.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. As previously discussed, so moved. Unless there's objection, members will take the prior law roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5472 from the Committee on Environment and Energy, a resolution declaring there will be no adverse impact on the environment from the addition of parcels to the Westchester County Agricultural District Number 1.
Mr. Kaplowitz.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll take number 8 and number 9 together, 5477. We had a public hearing this evening, a resounding no speaker, which we will take as approval. This is a petition for 8 additions. It's our statutory Board of Legislative. It has nothing to do with the executive branch, Board of Legislative opportunity once a year to review those parcels that want to get into the County Westchester Agricultural District Number 1. And to all legislators and to all listening, if you're in a town that doesn't have an agricultural district, you just need to go down to your local council and say to them, we want to get into the district, I got a parcel, and it's a good thing to do because we're trying to incent throughout the county agricultural activity for a whole host of reasons. So, Mr. Chairman, move 8 and 9, which would be the annual 2012 additions to the Agricultural District Number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplowitz. Members, we're on items number 8, which is ID number 5472, and ID number 5477, item number 9. Mr. Harcum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank First Legislator Kaplowitz, Chair of Committee on Environment and Energy, who was really one of the early driving forces behind the Ag District and creation of the Ag Board. So for his current leadership, but also his tenure of leadership. I'd also like to thank the members of the Ag Board who carefully scrutinized property after property to make their recommendations to us. This is really an important economic component of northern Westchester. It simply allows people the ability to farm, and coincidentally, most of the parcels are either in my district or Legislator Kaplowitz's district, but there are some Legislator Testa's, Legislator Borgia's district. I invite our colleagues and the people of Westchester to come to the northern part of the county on a Saturday or a Sunday and notice the abundance of farmers markets, all local fresh produce to market, fresh meat, the restaurants featuring local to table. It's quite an economic force that's taken hold in northern Westchester. And the Ag District is simply a way of protecting that investment and letting those people know that somebody's got their back if they want to farm. So thanking everyone for their leadership, I will vote for this and urge colleagues to as well.
Thank you, Mr. Harcum. Members on this item, Ms. Myers.
Yes, I rise obviously to support this. I would also invite colleagues from northern Westchester to come down to southern Westchester and visit us at Playland and at Wilson's Woods. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Other members on this item?
Yes, I think we'd like to play some basketball in downtown New Rochelle.
Other members? Mr. Kaplowitz, one is that we want to thank you for your leadership on this particular item as you continue to do this with the Ag District, and it's a kind of tricky deal since people don't realize that it kind of process starts very early. I believe it's December timeframe that they have to start doing their application, and then the Ag Board appropriately thanked by Mr. Harcum on this. And by the way, we do get some of that produce in Yonkers at our farmers market. Thank you so much. And come visit us downtown Yonkers on the farmers market at St. John's. Okay, all right. But in addition to that, Mr. Kaplowitz has advanced some additional legislation, while it's not part of this, that we need to continue to follow up on, which is the preservation and acquisition of additional farmland that we did several years ago, as far as a capital budget that is there, that we should be utilizing. And I hope that that we're going to see some additional activity soon, because I know that we did see a recent article about a loss of a farm, and that particular fund that has been in place, Mr. Kaplowitz, what year? 2006, I want to suggest.
The middle of the century, middle of the first decade, we utilized it once, tapped into it. We still have about $1 million in the purchase of development rights, PDR.
PDR. Thank you, Mr. Kaplowitz. With that, unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5477 from the Committee on Environment and Energy is a resolution approving the inclusion of parcel additions for 2012 to the Westchester County Agricultural District Number 1.
Mr. Kaplowitz.
Yes, it's previously discussed, sir.
So moved. Thank you, Mr. Kaplowitz. Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5498 from the Committee on Budget and Appropriations, an act authorizing the county to enter into an IMA with the City of Mount Vernon, pursuant to which the city will provide youth services for the term April 1, 2012 through March 31, 2013 for an amount not to exceed $174,000.
Ms. Myers.
Thank you. This was an item that was thoroughly discussed in Budget and Appropriations. This is for the amount of $174,000, an act that provides youth empowerment program, a safe haven summer camp and after-school program, science, technology, engineering, and math, meaning STEM, on Saturdays, and the very successful Step Up program that has been funded before for this period between April 1st of this year through March 31st of last year. And this program, these four programs actually serve approximately 200 at-risk county residents between the ages of 7 and 21, and is clearly an investment in our future for many of our residents. So moved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Members on this item. Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 4918 from the Committee on Appointments is the appointment of Millie Becker as a member of the Westchester County Human Rights Commission for a term to expire December 31st, 2013.
Ms. Shimsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Appointments Committee interviewed Ms. Becker at its August 27th meeting. We found Ms. Becker very passionate about the subject matter and evidenced the kind of good sense that you want people to have when they have to do the kinds of adjudications this board has to do. And therefore, I am happy to move for approval here tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Shimsky. Members on this item. Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 4967 from the Committee on Appointments, reappointment of Thomas Kane as an at-large career chief member of the Westchester County Fire Advisory Board for a term to expire December 31st, 2012.
Ms. Shimsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Kane is a well-known and very respected member of the firefighting community in this county. He has served his committee ably and well, and we are honored that he's willing to continue to serve. I therefore move his approval.
Thank you, Ms. Shimsky. Members on this item. We just want to note for the record on this particular item that there was some additional research done. Ms. Shimsky, if you could share that with the members.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. There is a question with this particular board as to what is required in terms of residency. As we've discussed at other meeting and other contexts today, all of our boards have different requirements. This board, our boards sometimes require residency within Westchester County or require residency within a part of Westchester County, and other boards do not. There was a question as to whether Mr. Kane, who is not a resident of this county, was qualified to serve on this committee. It appears that there is some ambiguity in the way the requirements are phrased as to whether or not residency is required. Some research was done. It appears that in 2004, when Mr. Kane, Chief Kane was originally appointed, there was research done, and it was determined that the ambiguity was such that it should not be read against his service, and we've come to the same conclusion with reference to his continued service as well.
Thank you, Ms. Shimsky, for that clarification. Other members? Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5080 from the Committee on Appointments, the reappointment of Walter Matistic Jr. as a member of the Westchester County Board of Ethics for a term to expire December 31st, 2014.
Ms. Shimsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Matistic has also served his committee capably and well, and we therefore move his nomination as well.
Thank you, Ms. Shimsky. Members on this item? Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5273 from the Committee on Appointments is the reappointment of Terry Kornblum Singer as a member of the Westchester County Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Directors for a term to expire December 31st, 2014.
Ms. Shimsky.
Ms. Kornblum Singer has also served her committee capably and well, and we therefore urge her approval here tonight as well.
Thank you so much. Members on this item? Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5505 from the Committee on Government Operations, authorizing the chairman of the county board to employ an independent financial firm to audit, review the actual revenues and expenses of Playland Park, along with the current procedures in place to ensure proper and accurate compilation of the data.
Ms. Borgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Government Operations Committee took up this resolution at the recommendation of Legislator Myers, Ryan, and myself. One of the reasons why we wanted to have an independent review of the finances of Playland Park is that we understand that there's been a lot of discussion about the park over the past several years. We anticipate that the administration is going to be making some sort of recommendation to changes to the park, and we felt that it was very important before we entered into any conversation regarding those recommendations. We haven't really gotten a lot of information about what they're considering, at least not into the committee. Perhaps some other members have had informal conversations, but not in the Government Operations Committee. We want to have a really firm grasp on the financial condition of Playland Park as it exists right now, and that includes all of the revenue streams. Although we do receive attendance and revenue reports on a semi-regular basis from the administration, it does not include several revenue streams that we think it's important to have a very complete picture of the finances of Playland Park, as we anticipate that we will be receiving some recommendations for changes by the administration, but that those changes might not take place, and we might have another season that operates Playland Park in the same manner that we've operated this season. I think we're all wanting to make sure that all of our county assets are, A, managed as appropriately as possible to maximize revenue and minimize expense, but also that in this particular park, which is such an iconic place in Westchester County, that we're making very good decisions with respect to its current operation as well as its future operations. So the Government Operations Committee did have a fairly extensive discussion about this, and as a result of that conversation, I would like to move this item.
Thank you, Ms. Borgia. Members on this item, Ms. Myers.
Yes, I would like to second that motion. I could go on, but I know a lot of people, not myself, but some people want to watch football. Frankly, I could stay here all night. However, I think this boils down to one very, very simple question. This is a $13 million cash business. Who wouldn't want it audited is really the question here, and therefore we need to. Therefore, I'm seconding the motion made by Legislator Borgia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Myers. Members on this item. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Yes, Chairman, just three questions, if I could, because I'm not on the committees that were discussing it, but I'm just for the floor, I think important to ask. First is just the issue of outside versus inside. Are we looking to O'Connor Davies, who is the general auditor and oversees the entire auditing of the entire book, or are we looking for an outside firm with fresh eyes and a different, potentially a different view? So that would be the first question there. Second is, are we going into the field to do primary research, or are we going to take the numbers as given? I'm one of the more tenured, along with Jim and Mr. Ryan and all. We for years saw a number that was in the book that was 1 million. 1 million people went to Playland every year. And then they lowered it to a $900,000 number. And I got the feeling at some point when they kept lowering it, and then suddenly it went down to the 400,000 range when they went to the pay one price band, that 500,000 people either suddenly discovered another place to go, or our pricing was really wrong, or the answer we even got was that million attendance number was wrong. And that, I think, supports what Legislator Myers is indicating, that given what's at stake, who wouldn't want to see these numbers? The problem is it's September, and they're not going to open the place, obviously, till Saturday in May. And so again, I put on the record, what can we do now, and do we want to look at a second step, a second approach, come next spring, whereby we actually go out and do some primary research, counting, at the gates, looking at revenues and things like that. I don't think it stops us here from this, but I think you'd be mindful of that in that process. And the third, and the obvious question, is the cost involved. The resolution doesn't really set out. It does give, of course, the chairman the ability to authorize to employ an independent financial firm. The question is, what would be the cost and the terms? I assume it would be a short-form contract under that arrangement, but I don't want to assume that. So I'm just asking what the discussions were in that regard. We know potentially what we're going to get, I think, to some extent, with the exception of, are we looking at primary or secondary research? That's important. And then again, what kind of cost are we looking at here? But in terms of the review, I think the question was, why wouldn't we want to do this? I will certainly support this. Good facts, a good analysis, good data, if nothing else, is going to be worth its weight in gold.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplowitz. And I don't have any of the answers to those questions, by the way, since that was the issue for me. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Myers was correct when she mentioned that, no, it's I think she used the figure 15 million, but it's 13 million. It's a $13 million cash business, and why you wouldn't, you want it audited. But let me just take that, kind of complement that point with another one. We had found it necessary to actually legislate to direct the administration to provide us with information. And I think that all of the board members probably understand that because of the problems that Playland has struggled with in recent years, it's far better for us to keep a handle on the picture as it changes, as it progresses through the season, than it is to wait for our once-a-year opportunity to see what the auditors conclude when they give us our once-a-year report on a cost center. And so certainly I know that the majority of this board felt that certainly was our preference. So what we asked for was, we wanted to see a number of different things. We wanted to see attendance throughout the season. We wanted to be able to track the attendance and compare it, having other comparative data, compare it to prior years. We wanted to talk to the department about different changes, events, conditions that should be taken into consideration so we can interpret the attendance numbers as they go up and down. We got into a whole discussion about marketing and the impact of marketing dollars on generating attendance there. We also wanted to take a look at the revenue numbers that were generated based on the different categories of attendance. And in addition to that, and even that alone doesn't give you the full picture, because we've discussed on this floor on prior occasions the fact that we needed to know the miniature golf revenue. We needed to know all of the contract prices that had generated, all the different contracts and their prices that had generated revenue for the county. We needed to know the parking revenue. There was no reason why we couldn't know the parking revenue every single business day that the park was open. Whether you wanted an individual day or a week at a time or 2-week intervals, there wasn't any particular reason why we couldn't have that. I'm going to mention something, just to make one point. Not that it changes the revenue number, but it certainly could be a reason why there could contribute to the gap between attendance numbers perhaps a couple years ago and attendance number this year. We have in our report that we get from the administration a recap of season passes, and we're running right now about 18,800, roughly around there. It's counted once in the figures. But even if every season pass returns 5 times, that's an additional 100,000 to the count. And we know that a lot of the attendance number over the years, we weren't getting every single day new people. So at the end of the season, if the count was 1 million, it was 1 million different people. There was a lot of repeat business. Some of these folks had 2, 3, 5 dozen trips, in them for the season. But this is just one thing that we know throws the number, and it could throw it as much as 100 to 200,000. I don't know for sure. You don't know how many times people use their season pass, but I'm sure that the computer system must track season pass number 5 and how many times it showed up to the park during the year, and would give us a better indication if it did that for all 18,000. But that's just a minor point. There are things that need to be looked at so we have a better handle on what the true attendance number is. And there are other items of revenue that we need to get. We need to get them now. We wanted them by law. We wanted them periodically throughout the season. We didn't get the complete picture throughout the season. We're still asking for that complete picture. And at this point, we're driven to this step where before the audit takes place that does the entire government, which we as a county board, retain a firm to do. Before we get to that point, we want a more detailed review of what we're doing at Playland, how we're doing it, and some statistical data that we feel is relevant for our future decision-making, things like attendance and number of concessionaires and the contracts that are generated, the prices of those contracts, and all of the categories of revenue. Because unfortunately, we stand here tonight on the 10th of September, and we still don't have a complete picture. I just saw the revenue numbers that we received, and on our categories of admission, but we still don't have a complete picture on the overall revenue of the park. There are some other things. I know that there's been a discussion. The county executive has said that, this is a loser. It's losing anywhere from $3 to $5 million a season. Well, we know that's not true. Even the budgeted amount was at a max of a $3 million tax subsidy support, and even it's wrong to begin and end the story there, because Playland as a cost center is really, when you look at the entire tax levy, isn't putting $3 million into it. It's only putting $2 because you have to net out $1 million, the revenue that Playland generates for other county departments. That's never included in the conversation. So what do we really have? We really have an operation that's generating, I don't know, 10.5 by budget against an expense structure of 12.5, and requiring a, the $2 million subsidy, and I've already done the math to net out the revenue that we generate at Playland for other departments. The point is, and I'll conclude with this, we need the full picture, all right? We're not bystanders here waiting for an administration to decide what it wants to do. They will not ultimately decide the future of Playland. This board will decide that future. As I've said time and time again, we need the tools that any legislative body would need to make the appropriate decisions relative to our park going forward. We don't have those tools. What we have right now is a toolbox that's incomplete, and we need one that is complete. So I was glad to join with my colleagues to introduce this resolution. I think it's unfortunate that we have to be resorting to this. I think with ease, it would be very, very easy for the administration, through the Parks Department, to provide us with a full picture every single week of the season. And, I'm waiting to hear the reasons why they couldn't have done it. But that's even kept from us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Other members on this item? All right, we can do that. Madam Clerk, long roll call vote, please.
Mr. Harkam?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano? Ms. Borgia?
Yes.
Mr. Burrows? Mr. Gelfarb? Mr. Kaplowitz?
Aye.
Ms. Marcotte? Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Ms. Perez? Mr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Shimsky?
Aye.
Ms. Spreckman? Mr. Testa? Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Williams? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Approved 10-6. Item 4876 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Government Operations, a bond act authorizing the issuance of $500,000 in bonds of the county to finance capital project B035B, Heavy Equipment Replacement Program.
Ms. Myers.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to actually take these two up together because it's easy. These are two bonds, one that funds heavy equipment replacement for the years 2006 through 2010 that was not purchased then, and the other is for going forward 2012 to 16. And what these purchase, and we've had a number of meetings discussing these. They would fund the acquisition of 2 dump trucks with plow spreaders to replace 2 existing 1987 dump trucks with plow spreaders. And then the other one is, oh no, I'm not finding it. Oh, the skid steer loader, how could I forget? The acquisition of a new skid steer loader required to fulfill the responsibility of maintaining our county-owned facilities. We did ask our budget director why not put these two together. He felt that this was a better way to go, and therefore they are still separate bond acts. So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Members, we're on discussion of the 2 separate items, item 16 for a heavy equipment program from 2006 to 2010, and then 2012 to 2016. Ms. Borgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to elaborate a little bit on what Legislator Myers has said, we did have a fairly extensive discussion in government operations about the need for the replacement of these vehicles. We learned from our Department of Public Works staff that many of these vehicles have been used well beyond their useful life. Some of them would not pass inspection. Some of them had repairs that were very costly, and it made sense to replace this particular set of equipment. I think it also, we also had a conversation, I think this sort of merits some consideration among the Board of Legislators about the relative merits of using equipment past its useful life versus having a policy of regular replacement of vehicles, mainly because of the efficacy and liability associated with using vehicles not replacing vehicles in the way that the plan intended in a routine manner, and what that means for our ability to actually do the work that our DPW needs to do, which of course is quite extensive and not only is on our roads, but of course they also assist in the maintenance of our parks, which we all love. And so there are some safety concerns as well as some policy decisions that I think it might behoove us to take up at a future time, and I do intend to do that in the Government Operations Committee. But that having been said, I think the Government Operations Committee is strongly in favor of moving both these items.
Thank you, Ms. Borgia. Members on this item? Without objection, members will take, no, you're shaking no? Am I good? Oh, all right. Long roll call vote. You know something? Short roll call. No, I got to do a long roll call. It's an act. Go ahead.
Mr. Harkam.
I try.
Mr. Mazzano. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. Mr. Gelfard. Mr. Kaplowitz. Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Aye.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Shimsky.
Aye.
Ms. Spreckman. Mr. Testa. Ms. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Approved 16-0. Item 4877, a bond act from the Committees on Budget and Appropriations and Government Operations, a bond act authorizing the issuance of $350,000 in bonds of the county to finance capital project B035C, Heavy Equipment Replacement Program, 2012 through 2016.
Ms. Myers.
As discussed, so moved.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Previously discussed, so moved. Without objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 4944 from the Committees on Budget.
Over, Madam Clerk.
Over, Mr. Harkam. Item 5040 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Public Safety and Security. A bond act authorizing the issuance of $961,000 in bonds of the county to finance capital project BIT-28, replacement probation's criminal court offender management system.
Ms. Myers.
Yes, before I turn this over to Legislator Perez for a description of this item and several that are to come before us, I would just note from Budget and Appropriations, there is a cost of just under $1 million for the purchase of this hardware and licenses and the consulting fees associated with this replacement. But what was very much made clear, I think, today, both in public safety as well as, and especially in the Budget and Appropriations Committee meeting, that this new ability to communicate is actually priceless. This is a real step in the right direction and definitely worth the expenditure of the $961,000. So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Ms. Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, this is a new automated system that will replace the current system, and it will support probation and integrated with the new state system. Almost all the counties in New York State have now switched to this new system, so moved.
Thank you, Ms. Perez. Members on this item? Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5251 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Public Safety and Security, an act authorizing the county to enter into use and dissemination agreements with local municipalities pursuant to which the county will act as lead agency to coordinate the use of New York State's traffic and criminal software program and act as liaison with the state police.
Ms. Myers.
Yes, Budget and Appropriations moved this forward today, and while there are no fiscal impacts through these IMAs, there is actually a huge savings that will be brought into play for the individual municipalities who sign into the usage of this program, and I would like to turn it over to Legislator Perez.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Ms. Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an electronic ticketing and accident report system, which is currently in about 30 county police cards, and is used in more than 50% of the police departments throughout the county. And it helps to create a very accurate ticket. The ticket is electronically put into the county record management system. It makes the traffic stop shorter, which is safer for both the driver and the police officer. So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Perez. Members on this item? Ms. Borgia, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick comment about the TRACS program. It also really assists our local courts because the information is legible, the processing is much speedier, so it's a situation that helps the municipality on many different levels.
Thank you, Ms. Borgia. Other members? Unless there's objection, member will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5286 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Public Safety and Security, an act authorizing Westchester County to enter into an IMA with one or more local municipalities and/or the additional municipalities on Schedule A for the term March 21st, 2012 through March 20th, 2017, whereby the municipality will assign an officer to county's police academy as an instructor.
Ms. Myers.
Yes, this was brought forward by Budget and Appropriations and Public Safety. I will turn it over to Public Safety, but I would like to add that, like these other items, this is another area where, with the county acting as the umbrella, per se, we are saving our regional, the regions in New York State, huge amounts of money, and it's more specifically the municipalities within Westchester County, by providing one police academy, by utilizing the individual police officers from different municipalities as the instructors, and by then giving them greater access to and less expensive access to the firing range. So all in all, this is a terrific use of county government to provide considerable savings to its municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Ms. Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The municipality will assign an officer to the county's police academy as an instructor to teach the courses to the new recruits. The officer in charge of the police academy reaches out to the municipalities to arrange for personnel to teach the courses to all the new recruits. So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Perez. Members on this item? Without objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5324 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Public Safety and Security, an act authorizing Westchester County to enter into intermunicipal agreements with municipalities located within Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Dutchess counties, whereby the county will provide access to the Westchester County Repository for Integrated Criminalistic Information System.
Ms. Myers.
Yes. And once again, this is an act with no fiscal impact to the county, but by providing this centralized booking system is saving thousands and thousands of dollars to the municipalities. So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Members on this item? Madam Clerk, long roll call vote.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Ms. Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The RICA system is an electronic fingerprint and digital photographing booking system. Last year, the state mandated that fingerprints have to be submitted digitally because they will no longer take the ink prints. This process improves the efficiency of our local police department. So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Perez, and sorry about that. Thank you. Madam Clerk, unless there is objection, we need a long roll call vote. We have to do a long roll call vote.
Mr. Harcum? Yes. Mr. Mazzano? Ms. Borgia?
Yes.
Mr. Burrows? Yes. Mr. Gelfarb? Aye. Mr. Kaplowitz? Aye. Ms. Marcotte? Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Ms. Perez?
Yes.
Mr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Shimsky?
Aye.
Ms. Sprecher? Mr. Testa? Yes. Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Williams? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Approved 15-0. Item 5325 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Government Reform, Efficiency and Savings, an act establishing a revised investment policy for Westchester County pursuant to New York State General Municipal Law, Section 39.
Ms. Myers.
Yes, this was an item that was brought to us by the Commissioner of Finance for the county. She recommended 2 revisions be made to our current investment policy. One was to add 2 banks to our list of banks that we do business with that are authorized depositories, both of which are smaller, but it does actually end up possibly giving Westchester County some savings at being able to work some lower rates. Secondly, there is a change that was passed by New York State with regards to the ability to, and I'm going to pass this over to Legislator Williams because he will understand this. He'll be able to articulate it much better than I. But this is a way of using large institutions to do both the collateral as well as the savings. And I'm going to turn it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Mr. Williams.
I think that Legislator Myers has done a great job in explaining this. This is the annual policy that the county adopts in terms of how we would invest working capital funds overnight mostly with different financial institutions. And the change actually dealt with going with collateralization of the deposits with a particular institution. And I think what we've done with the policy is to make sure that we covered that the collateralization is done in a way that covers the counties, any risk associated with it in terms of the quality of the collateral that underlies the deposits.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This always warms my investment blood to get the policy, and I stand here in support of. But what does chill me a little bit is in Section 2 regarding the amendment of Section 9 of the investment policy. The investment policy, and I'm quoting, also contains standards for security and custodial agreements with banks, which are addressed in Section 9 of the investment policy. Section 9 of the county's current investment policy requires that eligible securities used for collateralizing deposits be held by a third-party depository bank or trust company, trying to create just that, an intermediary who actually holds the securities. However, recent 2011 guidance issued by the New York State Office of the State Comptroller relaxes the tri-party arrangement by stating that the custodian of pledged collateral may be the same bank or trust company that is holding the deposits or investments. Now, if this was 2007 or before, I'm not sure this would have raised any eyebrows. Given this is 2012 and what we've just been through, I generally don't see coming out of Office of State Comptrollers issued guidance relaxing these kind of custodial arrangements. When you go on and you see that Chase indicated that there would be cost savings without any loss of protection because they would then not have to presumably pay for that third party, right? And you would be cutting out the middle person, if you will. Chase has indicated these cost savings achieved without any loss of protection. That's true. The collateral is still there. Chase has further stated savings realized will be better for the banks. Anytime a bank says that, at least they're being honest, as well as for its clients due to lower fees and higher interest rates. So I'm just curious how many more basis points we're getting in our interest because, in fact, they're moving in this direction. My guess is maybe it means they won't cut us as much as they would otherwise cut us. So I'm just curious what 0.0, I'm not sure what's less than 0.00, but whatever that rate would be. The concern, sir, is if nothing happens, this is fine. If something happens, we're going to look back to whatever tonight is and wonder why the New York State Office of State Comptroller does it. But with that said, we have to rely on somebody. Obviously, they're minding the ship. One hopes, one assumes, and one's going to have to take some trust in it. But it's really something that we're going to have to leave up to our finance commissioner to just monitor year after year. If nothing goes wrong, we're fine. The collateral's there and the collateral's there, 102% of the obligation. But if, in fact, there's even a hint or a whiff of anything going wrong, we might want to change that. And I'm sure the committee looked at that too. We're all concerned about that. But I'll support it. And the fact that we've welcomed First Niagara and the Westchester Bank to the area is great. And also I do note that Webster Bank, I think the amount we can actually deposit with them has gone from $100 to $200 million. So that's perhaps indicative of maybe their rates and their good neighborliness as well.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplowitz. Ms. Myers.
Yeah, just very briefly, because I know Legislator Williams has his hand up as well. But just to assure everyone, this was something that actually the committee did drill down on with the Finance Commissioner, who too was, she was very open about this similar concerns, but said that she recommended doing this only with the largest bank, which would be Chase, and if we're approached by them, which we have been, and only if the basis points are higher. So I think that, I don't want to speak for her, but it was clear, at least to me as Chair of Budget and Appropriations, that she was entering into this with eyes wide open and looking to protect, obviously, the assets of Westchester County. I know.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, you have to add to that?
No, just quickly, as a matter of a practical matter, ask the Finance Commissioner about the average amount of deposits we hold at any limited time. And for most part, on average, it falls below any amount that is specified in the caps. So most of the banks hardly hold a deposit that gets even close to the caps, because we don't have that level except for 2 times during the year that we might have an overnight deposit. So I know that there is a feeling that we've got all this money laying around. That is not so. So the risk itself are not really that great, considering the fact that the county does not have that much sitting in any of these accounts at any given time.
Thank you. Other members? Only other point is that during the committee meeting, and to your point, Mr. Kaplowitz, that there was a very lengthy discussion about that. The committee did modify the act as it is permitted to do, whether that's an amendment or anything else, that we modify the act to put a threshold minimum on the types of institutions to do that particular have that particular level of protection. In addition, as Mr. Williams just stated, it was very clear that the amounts, which actually was a question that people asked, well, who's really getting the benefit from this? Chase asked for this to be done and basically said that, and was truthful about it, that said their cost would be lower, but that didn't necessarily say how much was that going to equate to the Westchester County taxpayer. So that was a question that was asked, and between Commissioner Berg and Mario, they were not able to give us a number that was able to, and they wouldn't have that number for us. So it's something that we should all continue to monitor. Without objection, members will take the no, we got to do long roll call vote. Mr. Maison's back. Long roll call vote. Oh, we lost one and we got one.
Mr. Harcum?
Yes.
Mr. Maisano? Ms. Borgia?
Yes.
Mr. Burrows? Mr. Gelfarb?
We got you, Mr. Gelfarb. Thank you.
Mr. Kaplowitz?
Slow down. We got you. We have your vote, Mr. Gelfarb. Thank you.
Ms. Marcotte? Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Ms. Perez?
Yes.
Mr. Ryan? Ms. Shimsky?
Aye.
Ms. Breckman? Mr. Testa? Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Williams? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Approved 16-0. Item 5462 from the Committees on Budget and Appropriations and Community Services, an act authorizing Westchester County to amend an agreement with the City of New York under the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS program for fiscal year 2012.
Ms. Myers?
Yes. Just briefly before I hand this over to Community Services Chair, this is an agreement with the City of New York. It actually represents the 21st year that we're entering into this agreement with the City of New York, and it's because New York has been designated as the flow-through SMSA for a great part of the Northeast, and this is the way to get Westchester County's share, which actually goes to the cities of Mount Vernon and Yonkers as well as to the Planning Department. This was moved through budget and appropriations.
Thank you. Ms. Williams?
Sorry. The county to amend the agreement with the City of New York to extend it for an additional year for the period running through March 31st, 2013. And the grant totals exactly $2,019,229, and this would allow us to enter into a new agreement with the cities of Yonkers and Mount Vernon to provide them with funds from a portion of the amount to provide services to their local residents affected with HIV/AIDS. The one-year agreements with the city of Mount Vernon and Yonkers would provide the distribution of year 21, fiscal year 2012, with HOPA grant funds in the amount of $357,246 for the city of Mount Vernon and $357,000 for the city of Yonkers. So this includes item number 25, which is ID 5462 on your agenda, and item number 26, which is ID number 5463.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Williams. We're on discussion from items 25 and 26. Members on item 26. What was the last vote count, Madam Clerk? Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5463 from the Committees on Budget and Appropriations and Community Services, an act authorizing Westchester County to enter into agreements with the Mount Vernon and the City of Yonkers to provide funds under the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS program for fiscal year 2012.
Ms. Williams.
As discussed, so moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5465 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Government Operations, an act authorizing Westchester County to enter into an amendment to the consent order executed by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation on December 30, 2008, to adjust the county's obligations thereunder by extending certain interim deadlines, including a related fine, and funds a beach cleanup program.
Ms. Myers.
Yes, this was something that the Department of Environmental Facilities came in to discuss with Budget and Appropriations, as well as Government Operations. And basically what this is an amendment to extend two different interim deadlines, 6 months extensions on both to the end of 2012 and to the as well as to some of the cleanup costs, and to extend the full operation by 6 months. But it should be noted, I think, very, very importantly, especially to any of the environmental groups who are watching, who are so invested in this bionutrient removal program in Long Island Sound, that this does not change the December 31st, 2017 termination of this consent order. And what it has to do with, and I can turn this over to Government Operations as well, has to do with a loss of certain elements, certain discs that are utilized in the Mamaroneck wastewater treatment program that will be utilized for the actual restriction of nitrogen from being discharged into the water. And unfortunately, when they were initially, when they started initially putting them into the tanks, we got a huge rainstorm, and wouldn't you know, they floated away. So we had to go and clean up all the beaches upon which they floated in. And we were able to retrieve them. There's still a little bit of work remaining to be done, but this also provides for a dollar amount, $250,000, for the cleanup cost that was made necessary by this error and by the weather. So I will turn this over to Government Operations.
Thank you. Ms. Borgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Legislator Myers said, this is a result of a specific incident that happened over at least one day, where these media discs that are used for the nitrogen removal did flow out of the Mamaroneck treatment plant and into the beaches of both Westchester, Long Island Sound, and the communities on Long Island. The fine, this was an amendment that was negotiated by the Department of Environmental Facilities and the state DEC. There was, I think, a great deal of back and forth to determine the plan for the removal of these media discs. The county, at the time of the release, did do an extensive amount of the cleanup. The negotiation ended up in a fine for the county of $37,500, which is the DEC per day fine limit. Although, of course, the DEC has a right to impose that fine for every day that the situation exists. This was a negotiated settlement that included a $15,000 payment of the fine and a $22,500 deferral, assuming that the county does meet the new extended deadlines. The $250,000 is actually money that's set aside from the original consent order amount to reimburse private entities or municipalities that have done some of the cleanup of these media discs themselves. And interestingly enough, I did have a conversation with DEC, which I reported to the Government Operations Committee. They set the amount at 5% of the municipality or private entity costs, because they felt that the cleanup of these media discs, first of all, there wasn't a risk to the public of these items, and that they would be handled as routine beach cleanup, because, as you know, beaches always collect debris because of the tides and people's use. And so the $250,000 was set aside as reimbursement cost for the other organizations that have done the cleanup. But Commissioner Lauro did assure us that most of the discs that were cleaned up was actually handled by county employees, and in fact, county employees even went outside of Westchester County to do some of that cleanup. So it was an unfortunate situation. It's a big issue that we're dealing with over the course of many years, as Legislator Myers suggested. However, in this particular instance, it does seem as though the county does have the situation in control. But I do think that this is something that I intend to ask for routine updates on the 2008 consent order in government operations, because, of course, this is a very large liability for the county, and we want to make sure that we meet our obligations as we agreed. So it's going to be an ongoing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Borgia. Members on this item. Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5471 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Community Services, an act authorizing Westchester County to enter into an agreement with the Westchester County Healthcare Corporation for a term from January 1, 2012 through December 31st, 2016, pursuant to which WCHCC will provide community mental health services, including clinic treatment and court-ordered assertive community treatment services to adults with serious mental illness.
Ms. Meyer.
Yes, thank you. These items, this item as well as the next item, actually it's 1, 2, 3. This and the next two items are agreements between Westchester County Healthcare Corporation and the county to provide certain services that are required, and I would at this point turn this over to Legislator Williams to describe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This act will authorize the county to refer to Westchester County Health Corporation. patients who are in critical need of mental health services and provide them with the care, with the necessary care, beginning in, I think the agreement expired, actually the agreement expired December 31, 2011, so this is going forward. We're a little late on this, but we finally got around to it. So it will provide care through December 31st, 2016. So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Members on this item. We're on discussion, members, for items number 28, ID 5471, 29, 5473, and 30, 5473. All agreements with Westchester County Healthcare Corporation, various topics, but the floor is open for members. All right. Without objection, members, on item number 28, we'll take the previous long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5473 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Community Services, an act authorizing Westchester County to enter into agreement with the Westchester County Healthcare Corporation for a term commencing January 1st, 2012 and terminating December 31st, 2016, whereby the county will refer Department of Health patients in need of emergency medical services and treatment to WCHCC.
Ms. Williams.
As discussed, so moved, Mr. Chair.
As previously discussed, unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5474 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Community Services, an act authorizing Westchester County to enter into an agreement with Westchester County Healthcare Corporation for a term commencing January 1, 2012 and terminating December 31st, 2016, whereby the county will refer late-stage syphilis patients for diagnosis by lumbar puncture.
Ms. Williams.
This item is a little bit different, but it covers the medical care and the suspected late-stage syphilis patients. And the only way to obtain a reliable diagnosis is with lumbar puncture. The costs run approximately not to exceed $6,000 per year. And again, this is running through December 31st, 2016.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Members on this item. Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for the approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Item 5475 from the Committees on Budget Appropriations and Government Operations, an act authorizing the county to enter into grant agreements with the New York State Office for the Aging to accept grant funds under the AAA Transportation Operating Expense Program and enter into intermunicipal agreements for services to be funded by said grants.
Ms. Myers.
Yes, this is funding as described to us by our Director of Senior Services. This is actually federal, New York State Office for the Aging funding, as well as New York State AAA transportation money that comes through to villages who then subcontract to the towns and the cities. Or it comes through to the towns and the cities, and they subcontract with the villages. This is actually a sum of $44,000 that gets added onto the federal grants for the nutrition sites. The nutrition sites transportation for that percentage of the population that qualifies. I will turn this over to Legislator Borgia for more explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Ms. Borgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Ms. Myers suggested, this is a pass-through to our municipalities, the towns and the cities, and then subcontracting out to the villages where appropriate. The nutrition programs often run transportation programs. Some of them have their own transportation. Some of them use taxi vouchers and other means of transportation, and this assists in the funding for those programs, which are very, very valuable to our seniors.
Thank you, Ms. Borgia. Members on this item. Unless there's objection, members will take the prior long roll call vote for approval of the item. So ordered.
Approved 16-0. Under special orders, item 5550, submitted by the Chairman of the Board and Legislators Harcum, Shimsky, and L. Williams, a resolution determining that the county executive shall develop and present source of income legislation to the BOL within 60 days.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a resolution requesting that the county executive present to the Board of Legislation, develop and present to the Board of Legislature, draft legislation with respect to the source of income issue that has been so much in the press and has been such a dispute over the years between the county executive, HUD, the U.S. Justice Department. Just to give a little recap of, I know everyone has been, and those who are listening at home at this late hour, are familiar with the entire circumstances surrounding the county's litigation with HUD in connection with the settlement that has been reached. As a part of that settlement, the paragraph 33G of that settlement mandates that the county promote through the county executive legislation which was currently pending before the Board of Legislators, to ban source of income discrimination in housing. The board then, after the board passed legislation, county executive Astorino vetoed that legislation. That purpose of his veto, or the explanation in the veto message, was that the legislation, local law that created ambiguities, uncertainties, and was unnecessary regulations. After several disputes and court actions between the administration and HUD, the district court judge code found that the county was in an unambiguous breach of the settlement by virtue of that veto of the county executive. And the most recent development was a letter from the county executive to the court that he was now going to further at least comply with the settlement provisions by promoting legislation to the County Board of Legislators. However, the county board really needs to have the legislation that the county executive would like for us to enact before we can move forward, simply because the legislation that was vetoed clearly was vetoed on the basis that, and I'm going to read directly what it says, it says that the veto measure said that the BOL presented a local law that creates more ambiguity, uncertainty, and then it was an unnecessary regulation. Therefore, in order for us to reintroduce legislation, at least with the hope of closing this issue once and for all, we need to have what the county executive might believe is not ambiguous, is not unnecessary, and is not uncertain, so that we can move expeditiously forward, comply with the court order, and bring this matter to settlement once and for all. I think we've had enough contentiousness between the administration, HUD, to the extent that there are communities in this county who has lost funding because of this disagreement. So certainly we want to, and we ought to be trying to bring this to closure. But we want to bring it to closure in the correct manner. We don't want to go down the road that we have already gone down, where we introduce the same legislation and it is subject to another veto, or it is subject to objection. So what this legislation does is that this resolution is somewhat of an olive branch to the county executive to draft legislation that he believes would not meet the objections that were mentioned for his veto, in his veto message, and present that to the Board of Legislators so that we may move deliberately through our process in bringing this legislation to a vote. Thank you.
Mr. Mazzano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. The hour is late. On behalf of the Republican caucus, we will not be supporting this resolution. Let me tell you why. Number one, as we read through this two-page resolution, we find parts of it to be unclear, some of the language to be subjective, and the language needs to be greatly improved. Several parts I even found misleading. So based on the language itself, we have some problems. But more specifically, number two on my comments is we have now the monitor, the federal courts, and the Justice Department all finding the latest action by the county executive to send us the prior version of the source of income law to be acceptable. You don't have the monitor objecting, you don't have the courts objecting, you don't have the Justice Department objecting. We finally got to a point where those that we're involved with in contentious issues are not combating us at all. They have not disagreed with what the county executive did. The legislation's down here for us to review and to work on. And now, number three, we want to add a new requirement. On top of everything else, we're going to add a new requirement that I find, frankly, this resolution to be unnecessary and backwards. All of us in our high school and college days, we learned very clearly what legislatures do. They make the law. The executive branch enforces the law. The courts interpret the law. That's what separation of government's about. I get Legislator Williams' point that if the county executive vetoed it, he wants to know what language the county executive would accept. But unfortunately, I don't think it's the county executive's role to draft legislation. It's our job. It's our job. It's our charter job to do the legislation for Westchester. So what I think should happen here is rather than do this resolution, I think we should put the prior version into a committee, and we should go back to work in a bipartisan, collegial, professional way to work on legislation, include the administration, of course, in the debate along the way. And then I agree with Legislator Williams that we should find out what their position is, bring them in, set them at the table, find out their viewpoint. But regardless whether it's this county executive or any county executive, I, as a legislator, am never going to defer my lawmaking, law-drafting job to the executive branch. Why this legislature is telling the executive branch to draft the laws is bizarre. We do the drafting of the laws. That's what the charter says. That's what Government 101 said we all went to college. Legislators make the laws. Put this back in committee. Let's work diligently together in a bipartisan, collegial way, and let's come up with a source of income law that hopefully can get 17-0 vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazzano. Mr. Gelfarb.
Just very briefly, I'm also troubled in the fourth whereas clause where we say, whereas in contravention of the settlement. I don't know why we would why we would acknowledge that the county has breached the agreement. It's just gratuitous language and can only really come back to bite us. So I would certainly ask that that language be removed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harcum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for that delay. Mr. Ryan was actually sharing with me that most of the legislation that comes to our committee is actually drafted on the 9th floor. It's not drafted here. So the notion that we can't accept something that was taken from the 9th floor is just stretches credibility a little bit. Look, this is a very practical resolution. Let's take all of the hyperbole. Let's take all of the politics out of this. We spent 3 years working on this legislation, even before the settlement. You, Mr. Chair, were then chair of Government Operations Committee, and we had meeting after meeting after meeting. We had advocates on both sides. We had 3 public hearings, all of them till 1 in the morning. We did our due diligence in a bipartisan fashion. We went more than the extra mile, and it was vetoed. Okay, that's the process. We get it. But this body is not going to commit the resources to go through an exercise like that again. It's futile. We're coming up on budget season. Let's be realistic. A lot has changed. We've dismantled the Section 8 department. We used to control 4,000 of the 5,000 vouchers in the county. We were able to assist the landlords. That was one of their concerns. If you remember, you and me, Legislator Burton, Legislator Rogowski, we met with all of the Section 8 coordinators to address the concerns that the landlord had. We no longer have that control to address those concerns. That's a big chunk of the bill that's now gone. How do we address that? So, you know, for this legislator, it's kind of like Charlie Brown and Lucy with the ball. You know, she pulls it away every time he goes to kick. We spent 3 years on this. I'm not going to go through this exercise again, only at the last minute to have something vetoed. You know, I think it's fully incumbent upon the county executive. If he wants to send us something, please send us something that he can support. We will take it up in committee. We will do our due diligence in a bipartisan fashion. But as far as us taking it up again, after 3 full years and the amount of time and effort we put into that, been there, done that.
Thank you, Mr. Harcum. Ms. Breckman.
Okay, if you don't want to do it or do a new law, well, why don't you take the old law that we had and you just vote on it, yes, up or down, yes or no, and that's it.
It's not applicable, Mrs. Breckman, because big parts of Section 8.
Excuse me a second. I'm sorry. I know it's late and you know everything out this.
Chair,
So, Mr. Harcum.
Through the chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
As I mentioned, the parts of the law are no longer relevant because there were portions of it that had a hotline for landlords to call to deal with Section 8 issues. That is when the county controlled 4,000 of the 5,000 Section 8 vouchers. When the county executive dismantled our control of ended the contract with the state for Section 8, we lost complete control over that. So there's no centralized resource anymore that this body can control and has accountability to us to do that. And the second point is he's already vetoed that. So if there are concerns, it should be revised at that end, bring it back, and we're happy to entertain it. But thank you for your...
Mr. Testa.
Mrs. Breckman.
I just want to read one paragraph. You have the answer right here in the resolution. You know, there's a lot of things in here that are pretty over the top, but this is the one thing that is quoted that I would say should settle this, because the judge himself made the statement that for the county to discharge the county's duty under the settlement, the county executive should request that the legislature reintroduce the prior legislation. He did that. His job is done. I don't see him doing anything past that until this board takes action. So I would say you have it in this resolution, the answer right there.
Thank you, Mr. Testa. Other members? Mr. What? Mr. Williams.
One quick point of correction. That was for my colleague, Mr. Testa. I think that that was a recommendation of the monitor, basically. That was the language, yeah. That was upheld, yeah, but it was a recommendation of the monitor.
No. Mr. Testa, I am going to agree with you. How about that? Right? The judge's order was at minimum, by the way, that was a quote, at minimum, the county executive should request the legislature to reintroduce the prior legislation. And the county executive did that. There is nothing in the stipulation and order that required this board to pass anything. That is correct. So at this particular point in time, for us to go through the exercise of, as Mr. Harcum pointed out, and spend 3 years of going through legislation to deal with that, why don't we do exactly what this resolution is suggesting, that the county executive could present to us, should he choose to do so, a piece of source of income legislation that could be the starting point for those discussions, as Mr. Mazzano just pointed out so accurately. And it would really, one of the things that people could go back to through history, and fortunately for us, because we have so many members of prior administrations that work with us directly, we have the former first deputy county attorney, no disrespect to our current first deputy county attorney, that works for the board. And just so people have the record correct, as this administration, the board introduces more legislation now than the county executive, which was not the case in prior administrations. So if we want to take a good example of something that we worked so hard on together in this Board of Legislators, it was called the Health Care Contribution Act. And for people that don't recall that, you should remember that the county executive announced legislation in January at a breakfast of the County Association, by the way, that he was going to present to the board. And then a week later, we got that legislation, and the board then deliberated over that legislation. But the county executive brought it to us. So he had it ready 10 days, within the first 10 days of his initial term. You know, being reasonable, 60 days doesn't sound unreasonable, should the county executive wish to do that. But as Mr. Harcum said, we spent a lot of time. Mr. Mazzano, you spent some time with us on this as well, right? That many members around this chamber did, and that's just not a course of action that we need to go through at this point in time. So let's have a long roll call vote. Let's do that. Madam Clerk, long roll call vote.
Mr. Harcum.
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano. Yes. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. Yes. Mr. Gelfarb. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Aye.
Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
Yes.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Shimsky.
Aye.
Ms. Spreckman. Mr. Testa. Ms. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Approved 15-1. Item 5551, submitted by the Chairman of the Board, a resolution setting a public hearing relating to the issuance by the Colorado Educational and Cultural Facilities Authority of its tax-exempt bond for the benefit of the Iona Preparatory School in the aggregate principal amount of $9 million.
Mr. Harcum, for the public hearing date.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would move that this public hearing be held October 15th at 7:30 p.m.
So this is for the second resolution to set the public hearing for the item that Mr. Mazzano presented, which the next board meeting, just so you know, the reason the date is not September 24th is that the legislation, Mr. Mazzano, the legislation that you presented.
Point of information.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was actually in a conversation with my colleague on the last vote. I meant to vote in the negative. I voted in the affirmative, and can I change my vote? I'm sorry, it's a late hour.
So sad, too bad. No, I'm just kidding. Miss Marcotte, I thought it was just a frenzy of the evening moment that we
were caught up in a conversation.
You were caught up in the
part
moment.
of the agenda.
I believe I voted in Legislator Marcotte turned around to chat with me about a policy item.
You know something? Some of these things, Mr. Mazzano, no problem. We will correct the votes as necessary.
No on the prior vote. Then?
We will correct and modify the votes for you. However, usually this is similar to those plays. Once you have you take the next play, you don't get a chance to throw the red flag. For those football fans out there, not a problem. We will correct that for you. For this particular item, this is a motion that is on the floor for a resolution to set a public hearing on October 15th. The statute that you presented to us, Mr. Mazzano, said that we had to have a 14-day period prior to the notification, and it was inside the period of that time. That is why it's not September 24th, because we are trying to move this as expeditiously as possible. Madam Clerk, so October 15th, unless, no, we got to do a long roll call vote now that everyone's changed their vote the last time. So, but we could do a short roll call vote. Short roll call vote for the setting of the public hearing. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Harcum.
Yes.
Mr.
Or did I mean no? Or did I mean yes? Yes.
Mr. Mazzano.
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Mr. Chairman.
I think yes.
Approved 16-0.
Yes, Ms. Myers.
Not to prolong this, but really, and I'm being serious here, despite the fact that I really don't care about football. Why are we so what's the final vote on number?
That would be a reasonable question to ask.
On number 1 under special orders, where we had a vote, now, so we're changing that?
Madam, we are allowing people that are at 11 o'clock at night to make a modification in something that was clearly not their intention. So,
That's
no?
crazy.
So the final, Madam Clerk, what is the vote count?
I now have 13-3.
See, okay, this is nuts. Sorry.
Jimmy said yes.
There is not a necessary for the motion to reconsider. The 13-3 vote was because the people that indicated they were modifying their vote, and that's what the changes reflect. No, we're not doing that, right? We modified those folks that spoke up immediately, as Ms. Marcotte did.
No.
Yes, it would be in order. We would do a motion to reconsider. Okay. So let's reconsider the previous vote. So let's go through this, and let's go through this technically just so we understand what would happen on this motion to reconsider the vote. The motion to reconsider the vote will not change the outcome of the vote. Huh? It could, but... So, motion to reconsider, Mr. Ryan.
I mean, the question was raised over here by Mrs. Myers. She's absolutely right. Mr. Mazzano has now raised it. There can be a motion to reconsider. There'd be a second. There will be a vote. Votes, if we understand what we want to do, the vote should be yes. Once it's a yes, it's live in front of us. You could get a totally different result. My expectation is it'll be the same result except for you two changing to a no. You're going, there's a lot of changes. Well, the point is, once it's in front of us live, then you basically are just retaking the vote again.
All right, so the vote as it stood initially stands. We're going to have a motion to reconsider. There's a second. There's a second on a motion to reconsider.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Surely.
If you are willing to entertain that members across the aisle would like to change the vote, it's not going to change by doing this exercise. So if they say they voted in error, we take that in good faith. Why don't we just take that number and have the clerk record it?
No. The right way to do it is to have the motion to reconsider. So we have a motion to reconsider. It's been moved and properly seconded. I understand it. We don't want to delay it any longer. Ms. Myers, was there a different point?
Yeah, my point is that we are taking something that is extremely serious and that could cost this county millions and millions of dollars, and we are trivializing it based on, ooh, I'm sorry, I was talking and the hour is late. Tough. This is meaningful, and I truly believe that we need to do this the right and proper way. This is a huge, huge deal, and it's not to be giggled over. Thank you.
And we will do that. So we have a motion to reconsider on the floor. It's been moved and properly seconded. Madam Clerk, a long roll call vote on the motion to reconsider. A yes would be to reconsider the previous vote. A no would be not to do that. So, correct. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Harcum.
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano. Ms. Borgia.
Yes.
Mr. Burrows. Mr. Gelfarb. Mr. Kaplowitz.
Yes.
Ms. Marcotte. Ms. Myers.
No.
Ms. Perez.
Yes.
Mr. Ryan. Ms. Shimsky.
Yes.
Ms. Sprague. Mr. Testa? Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Williams? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Motion passes 15 to 1.
So we are now on the item reconsidering the item which is Special Order 5550? 5550.
Is a call of the question appropriate right now?
That is calling the question.
Calling the question.
Madam Clerk, a long, slow roll call.
Mr. Harkam?
Yes.
Mr. Mazzano? Ms. Borgia?
Yes.
Mr. Burrows? Mr. Gelfarb? Mr. Kaplowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Marcotte? Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Ms. Perez?
Yes.
Mr. Ryan? Yes. Ms. Shimsky?
Aye.
Ms. Spreckman? Mr. Testa? Ms. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Williams? Yes. Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Approved 10-6. Motions, resolutions, call of the districts.
Motions, resolutions, and call of the district. Ms. Shimsky.
Therefore.
I'm sorry to cause further anguish at this late hour, but here it goes. I'm asking my colleagues to join me on a memorial resolution for Beverly Levine. Ms. Levine passed away this morning while we were in B&A. She, at the time of her passing, she was an Ardsley Village trustee, the Ardsley Library Board president, the village historian, president of the Ardsley Historical Society, board president of Southern BOCES, a member of the Ardsley Traffic Committee, which is how I got to know her, and liaison to the Volunteer Ambulance Corps. In small villages like Ardsley, people double up, but this is quite an impressive resume. It's going to be a terrible loss to her village, and she was a wonderful person, and so many of us are going to miss her. The second one I'd like to discuss tonight, I hope is the worst one I ever have to deal with if I'm on this board for 25 years. I'm sure many of you have read in the papers the story of Martha Corey Ochoa, the Dobbs Ferry valedictorian from last June, who committed suicide her first night at Columbia University. She was a wonderfully gifted person. This has not only robbed her of her life, robbed us of unlimited potential, but it was a horrible, horrible trauma, not only for her bereaved parents, but for the entire village of Dobbs Ferry. The wake was one of the worst things I've ever gone through in my entire life, but of course I get to go on with my life in a way that her close friends and her parents never will be able to. And the really freakish thing about this is she was one of 3 of my constituents who took their lives in the last couple weeks, all young adults. The other 2, I am not doing memorial resolutions right now because there seems to be some indication that the families want their privacy, and I certainly don't want to increase the anguish of people who are already suffering unspeakably horribly. But I know I know the hour is late, but I wanted to put some observations on the record, adapted from an article by Stephanie Pinder-Anneker in the Journal News, who is, among her other credentials, an instructor at the Harvard School of Medicine. Suicide is almost all the time the cause of a treatable mental illness. Mental illness is an organic illness or disease, just as if one had the flu or a broken arm. It's particularly prevalent among adolescents and young adults because their brains are not fully developed, and certain adaptations that would help us refrain such as impulse control, are not there or are completely lacking. We may not be able to save everyone, but there is a lot that we as individuals and we as a society can do to minimize these horrible, horrible deaths. Everything from suicide barriers on bridges, locking handguns, trying to get a handle on alcohol and drug abuse, especially binge drinking on college campuses, excuse me, reaching out to members of marginalized communities, which include those who have mental illnesses, those who are the subject of bigotry, bullying, and so on. And the right coverage of these incidents by the media can reduce their incidence by making us all aware of what we can do to prevent them. On the other hand, sensational coverage can increase the likelihood of copycat suicides, which obviously makes the problem worse. And the myth, and there are many myths surrounding suicide. Some of us grew up in religious traditions where people were not allowed proper burials if they were suicides in our lifetimes. But, so there are a lot of myths, and a lot of people still hold them, and a lot of people are still afraid of the stigma those myths cause in a lot of people in our society. The worst thing you could do if you think someone is suicidal is ignore it, not talk to them. Talking to them will not make them more likely to do it. Not talking about it will make them more likely to do it. Anyway, this is a fabulous article. I'm going to put it in the communications for our next meeting. I've also discussed this with the chair of our Community Services Committee, and we are going to try to put together some program for our committee on suicide awareness and prevention, because as individuals get educated, as small groups of people get educated, as word gets out, the more lives we'll be able to save. And there's saying, I believe by Maimonides, that if you save a life, you save one life, you save the world entire. And just thinking about what has gone on in my district in the last few weeks, this is something that we can do that would truly be a life or death situation. And it can make us proud of what we do, that we're able to take the kind of power we have and use it for such elevated purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that you asked if all members were supporting you on that particular thing, and I'm looking around.
Yes, I am.
Yes, and I believe on both of those that would be a yes.
And trust.
And Trustee Levine, that's what I thought. Mr. Testa, I thought I saw your hand. No, Ms. Myers.
Yes, I would like to add the name of Anna Pergola onto the memorial resolutions, please.
Thank you. Ms. Perez, then Mr. Kapowitz.
Yes, I would like to add my name to Jeanette Lancy Ray.
Yes. Mr. Kapowitz.
I'd like to add the name of Harriet Forsyth.
Harry Forsyth. Mr. Burrows, sorry about that.
Yes, please add the name of Chester A. Wargocki, W-A-R-G-O-C-K-I.
Okay, Ms. Williams.
I would like to add my name to Jeanette Nancy.
Very good.
And Mary Russo.
And Mary Russo. All right. Mr. Harcum, and before you do that, I saw that between Cy Shulman, that I'm sure that all legislators would want to join Mr. Ryan on Cy Shulman, and also with Ms. Capelli. I'm not sure who else would want to join on that, but I know that at least most of us would, right? So, thank you. Mr. Harcum.
Could we please add the name of Theodore Sloan, Mr. Chair? Thank you.
Theodore Sloan. Other members? All right, if we all could please rise and observe a moment of silence for all of those mentioned in tonight's memorial resolution. Mr. Harcum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I would move that we adjourn and reconvene on September 24th at 7 p.m.
On the motion of Mr. Harkam, the board stands adjourned.
Thank you.